Welcome back to our channel. Today, we will explore a new case, the case of Matthew Podilac. Matthew Podilac, known as Matt, was born on June 10, 1975, in Parma, Ohio, USA. He is the son of Patricia and Joseph Podilac in high school. He was a member of the hockey team. After graduating, Matthew joined the United States Navy and completed his military service. Upon returning to civilian life, he worked at an industrial finishing company owned by his uncle. However, Matthew's work environment was challenging, according to his sister, Chrissy DeLuca. Some of his co-workers disliked him, partly because he was set to receive a promotion they believed he did not deserve. Meanwhile, his uncle was grooming him to eventually take over the business. Matthew had a passion for outdoor activities and enjoyed boating, hiking, fishing, hunting, as well as playing softball and hockey in his free time. In 2003, he met Holly McFeature, and they quickly began dating. They soon moved into a house in Cleveland. Friends described Matthew as overjoyed to have found someone with whom he could build a family. Within a year, their first daughter, Samantha, was born, and 2 years later, they welcomed a son, Josh. Holly also had a child from a previous relationship. Matthew's mother, Patricia, remarked, "When Matthew fell in love, he fell in love 110%, and he really loved Holly." So, in a short span of time, Matthew transitioned from being a bachelor to a father of 3. The first few years of his relationship with Holly were filled with mutual understanding, love, and passion. By the mid-20s, Matthew and Holly's relationship had become strained. They frequently arguments and full of disagreements. When they fought, he would leave home and spend the night at a friend's house. This happened repeatedly, and Matthew's friends urged him to end the relationship, as they felt Holly was selfish and untrustworthy. However, Matthew always returned to Holly. He had a life insurance policy naming Holly as the beneficiary. His friends advised him to remove her as the beneficiary, but he ignored their suggestions. According to Russell, Matthew's best friend, his emotions during this time fluctuated dramatically. He was sometimes very happy, at other times crying, and occasionally seemed scared. Russell also observed that Matthew had become depressed. Still, Matthew remained hopeful about raising his 3 children, concerned about the unstable environment at home. Russell advised him to take precautions, including removing any weapons from the house. In 2006, after the hockey season ended, Matthew started gambling online, which led to significant financial losses. His family and friends noticed that he seemed unwell and increasingly depressed. Following their advice, he consulted a doctor who prescribed antidepressants. By the spring of 2006, Matthew's health began to worsen. On Memorial Day, Russell became very concerned about Matthew's physical condition. Russell asked Matthew to help move a motor from one boat to another, but Matthew, who used to be very strong, had gained weight, was sweating heavily. He complained of back pain and said he had lost strength. Russell urged him to seek medical attention and recommended a doctor. Matthew visited the doctor on July 26, 2006, before the appointment. He called Russell to ask for directions to the doctor's office. During the call, Russell overheard Holly yelling at Matthew, insulting him by calling him too stupid to find the office. At the appointment, doctor diagnosed Matthew with kidney stones and prescribed medication for both the stones and the associated pain. At noon on July 30, Matthew called his father to tell him he had bought his daughter a fishing rod and wanted to plan a fishing trip in the coming days. That evening, Matthew attended a party with Russell. He later testified that Matthew's health seemed poor. Later that day, Matthew's father called an ambulance out of concern for his son, noting that Matthew sounded confused and very upset during a brief phone call. When the ambulance arrived, Matthew was taken to Parma Hospital with suspected multiple organ failure. At the hospital, doctors discovered that Matthew's kidneys were failing and diagnosed him with metabolic acidosis, a condition where his blood had become very acidic. Dr. Mandate, one of the ambulance crew doctors, suspected that Matthew might have ingested a toxic substance like methanol or antifreeze. Holly was present at the hospital, and when asked if Matthew had swallowed antifreeze or rubbing alcohol, she denied it. The following day, on July 31, 2006, Matthew passed away in the hospital due to kidney failure, according to doctor mandate. Metabolic acidosis is usually caused by breathing problems, but this was not the case for Matthew. Instead, he explained that ethylene glycol, a toxic chemical found in antifreeze, could also cause metabolic acidosis. Matthew's death deeply affected his family and friends. Holly's friend, Rebecca Vega, supported her in the days following Matthew's passing. She accompanied Holly to the funeral home to make arrangements, but Vega noticed something strange. Holly displayed no emotion and even began whistling in the room where the coffin would later be placed. For visitors, she appeared completely indifferent. Russell also described Holly's behavior as if she were at a celebration, acting as though nothing had happened. Soon after, the day after Matthew's death, Holly went to the bank and withdrew money from his account using his bank card. She also wrote checks in his name and emptied the account entirely. After Matthew's mother reported Holly's actions to the police, Holly was arrested and charged with 2 counts of forgery. Holly later agreed to pay damages, claiming she had taken the money to provide for the children after Matthew's death. Holly was the beneficiary of Matthew's life insurance policy, but the payout was small. She received only $10 2 weeks after Matthew's death. Rebecca visited her and noticed open bottles of cleaning products in the house, concerned about the safety of the young children living there. Rebecca asked Holly about them. Holly explained that one of the bottles contained antifreeze, which Matthew had allegedly used for his boat. However, Russell said that Matthew had not had a working boat since 2004 or 2005, when the boat's engine failed. After Matthew passed away, all his belongings were removed from the house. Holly gave Matthew's computer to a friend to erase some of its contents and destroyed his clothes by cutting them up and throwing them away. Now his father and brother have no things left of Matthew to remember. The autopsy revealed that Matthew had large amounts of ethylene glycol, the active ingredient in antifreeze, in his system. Holly claimed that Matthew might have ingested it intentionally to harm himself. However, the medical examiner was unable to determine the cause of death. Additionally, Holly told she had no idea what antifreeze was. She gave conflicting accounts to others, including telling a friend that Matthew had died at work. She also said that one of his colleagues could have poisoned him out of envy because he was the boss's nephew and had an advantage over other employees. However, Matthew's family believed that the culprit could have been someone much closer. Holly's sister claimed that Holly cried in the car before the funeral, but her lack of emotion during the service surprised Matthew's family. Later that year, Holly met Jameson Kennedy, her ex-boyfriend, at a bar by the spring of 2008. They had started dating, but Holly never shared any details about Matthew's death with him. Jameson had a serious criminal history and struggled with alcohol and banned substance. In September 2008, while drinking and intimate, Holly became very emotional and began talking about Matthew. She cried, saying she just wanted everything to end and that she wanted to leave Cleveland. She expressed regret about what had happened. When Jameson asked her what she regretted, Holly admitted that she had put something in Matthew's drink that made him feel sick and ultimately caused his death. Jameson was uncertain whether Holly was being truthful. After hearing her confession, he consulted his old friend, a lawyer. Jameson confided in his friend that Holly had admitted to killing Matthew, believing the confession to be credible. His friend reported it to law enforcement. Later, Jameson called Holly to discuss her confession without informing her that their conversation was being recorded. He hoped she would reaffirm that Matthew's death was caused by her tampering with his drink. However, during the call, Holly firmly denied ever harming Matthew. After this, Jameson and Holly's relationship began to deteriorate. Jameson suspected her of being unfaithful. On November 8, 2008, he visited her house to confront her and express his anger. Frightened, Holly called the police. When officers arrived at the house, Jameson attacked them. He was arrested and charged with assault. He was subsequently sentenced to 10 years in prison for assaulting the officers following his arrest. Jameson decided to inform the police about Holly's confession, so there was more and more evidence pointing to Holly being involved in Matthew's death. Police had initially begun investigating Matthew's death in 2007 after the autopsy report was released. However, since the police did not consider Matthew's death to be a homicide, the case stalled. Dr. Galita, a forensic pathologist and medical examiner with over 10 years of experience, conducted Matthew's autopsy the day after his death, in January 2007. 6 months later, he released a detailed autopsy report co-signed by the county doctor. The report concluded that Matthew had died from ethylene glycol poisoning. Though the manner of death remained undetermined, Dr. Galita explained that after ethylene glycol entered Matthew's body, it traveled through his blood to his liver. A significant buildup of these crystals caused blockages, according to Dr. Galita. The flank pain Matthew had been suffering since May 20, 2006, was attributed to these blockages. Upon examining his kidneys, the doctor observed extensive damage, as well as signs that the organs were attempting to heal. Crystals were also found throughout other parts of Matthew's body, including his brain and ears. The examination further revealed that Matthew had very severe acute myocarditis. Dr. Galita concluded that myocarditis could not have developed from one episode of acute ethylene glycol intoxication. Instead, it would have required at least 3 months to manifest. He concluded that Matthew died of chronic ethylene glycol poisoning that occurred over a 3-month period. Matthew's friends noted that his favorite drink was raspberry iced tea, which he frequently brought to work. Matthew's friend mentioned that Holly occasionally delivered Matthew's lunch to work, which always included a bottle of raspberry iced tea. In August 2007, police discovered 2 bottles of Pensarn antifreeze in Holly's garage. In 2010, 3 years after the original autopsy report, the forensic expert issued an amended report concluding that Matthew had died from chronic ethylene glycol poisoning and declaring his death to be a homicide. The amended report did not change the cause of death, but changed the manner of death to homicide. In July 2012, Holly McFeature was charged with the aggravated intentional killing of Matthew Podilac and the distribution of a substance not intended for human consumption. Matthew's older brother, Mark, revealed that their family suspected Holly's involvement in Matthew's death. Investigators believed that Holly had been secretly adding antifreeze to Matthew's iced raspberry tea over the course of several weeks or even months. Holly pleaded not guilty and went to trial in 2013. The case against her relied entirely on circumstantial evidence. During the trial, the prosecution called 15 witnesses, including Matthew's family, friends, his doctor, Dr. Galita, and several police officers involved in the investigation. Testimony covered Holly's suspicious behavior, a phone call she made to Matthew before he visited his doctor, and the fact that Matthew had not owned a working boat since 2004 and had no practical reason to use antifreeze. Meanwhile, Holly's defense attorney argued that Matthew's family and friends were quick to blame her without any concrete evidence, putting enormous pressure on law enforcement to act against her so soon after Matthew's death. The prosecution's main witness, forensic expert Dr. Galita, conducted the autopsy on Matthew. Dr. Galita provided a detailed explanation of how he determined that Matthew had been poisoned over a period of 3 months. He discovered crystals in Matthew's kidneys and signs of cardiac myocarditis, which are consistent with prolonged exposure to ethylene glycol. He ruled out other potential causes, such as fungal or viral infections, and clarified that myocarditis could not have been the result of a single acute exposure to ethylene glycol. Other witnesses supported Dr. Galita's findings. Matthew's friends testified that his health began to decline in the spring of 2006. In July 2006, he was diagnosed with kidney stones, and his condition worsened over time. Regarding Matthew's relationship with Holly, prosecution witnesses described it as increasingly strained. Holly's lawyers claimed that their client was not involved in Matthew's death. They argued that Matthew was depressed due to significant gambling losses, work-related struggles. The defense suggested that he intentionally ingested a fatal dose of antifreeze. They also maintained that Matthew's death resulted from a single instance of poisoning rather than repeated doses over time. To support their argument, the defense called Dr. Robert Bucks, an expert from El Paso County, Colorado. He testified that Matthew's death was caused by acute poisoning, meaning a one-time exposure to ethylene glycol, which could indicate he was intent on self-harm. Dr. Bucks disagreed with Dr. Galita's conclusion that Matthew had myocarditis and instead argued that Matthew likely suffered a heart attack. He further explained that myocarditis can occur without ethylene glycol poisoning and that lower back pain is not a symptom of such poisoning. Additionally, Dr. Bucks stated there is no link between kidney stones and poisoning. However, the prosecution presented evidence that, while Matthew experienced some depression, he was committed to being a father to his children and was making plans for them. Testimony also revealed that Matthew had sought medical treatment for both his mental health and physical issues. Jamison Kennedy testified in court, claiming that Holly had confessed to him that she spiked Matthew's drink. However, Holly denied ever making such a confession. Jamison's testimony was supported by Inspect Mike Quinn, who noted that when Jamison told law enforcement of Holly's confession, there was no public knowledge that Matthew had died from ethylene glycol poisoning. This refutes the theory that Jamison might have fabricated his testimony based on information he heard elsewhere. Holly, however, argued that Jamison made the accusation either to secure a reduced sentence for his own crimes or to take revenge on her. The jury spent 3 days deliberating and weighing the evidence and testimony presented before the court. Ultimately, on August 28, 2013, they found Holly McFeature guilty on all counts related to the death of Matthew Podilac. Evidence of questionable conduct, particularly her use of ethylene glycol and her strained relationship with Matthew, played a significant role in Holly's conviction. The court sentenced Holly to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 30 years. This decision reflected the seriousness of the case, as well as the significant risk that Holly's actions posed to others. Although she would be eligible to apply for parole after 30 years, the success of her parole request would remain a major challenge and was uncertain. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Alexander Jackson. Cedar Rapids is a city in Lynn County, Iowa, United States. It is the industrial and cultural center of the state, with a population of about 130,000. It exemplifies the blend of modern urban living with rural traditions in America. Jackson's family used to live on Oak Street, Cedar Rapids, and then they moved to Oregon. The Jacksons were a well-off family and had a harmonious family life. The children were well-behaved and did not exhibit any aggressive behavior. The Jacksons relocated in September 2011. Jan and Melissa Jackson purchased a 320-square-meter house for $400,000. Their 2 children were Alexander, known as Alexander, and their younger daughter Sabrina, with a 1.5-year age gap between them. Jan retired after a successful career in information technology, while Melissa, who had been a photographer, became a stay-at-home mom after their children were born to focus on raising them. Their family could afford their children's college education and yearly vacations to resorts, and they lived in a large, beautiful house. In the evenings, the parents prioritized spending quality time with their children, engaging in activities such as watching movies or playing board games. They also engaged in lively discussions on various topics, including economics and the children's future. Alexander, though quiet and shy, but he easily makes friends. On the contrary, Sabrina is more outgoing and talkative. After finishing school, Alexander developed a passion for video games, often playing late into the night and chatting online with friends. He graduated from Kennedy High School in 2019. During that time, Alexander played the flute and Sabrina played the oboe in the school symphony orchestra. Here, he partnered with an organization to create a project to renovate a house in the historic downtown area. He spent many hours painting the interior house to make it habitable for low-income families. His efforts were featured in the local newspaper, highlighting his dedication to socially beneficial project. Additionally, he participated in scouting. Sabrina excelled in her studies and was very active. In December 2019, she represented the presidential candidate during his visit to Sidora Pizza to discuss global warming issues. It was likely during this time that her brother, Alexander, began to feel distant from her. On the contrary, his father, Jan, are very close to him. However, Melissa and Sabrina behaved in ways that irritated him, particularly their lack of understanding or acceptance of his interest in gaming. Their differing views on life frustrated him, and when he discovered that Sabrina planned to vote for an independent candidate in her first election, his disdain for her grew. Perhaps he had harbored resentment all along, but it was only now that he realized how different his sister, Sabrina, was from him. At that moment, he realized that he would no longer be able to look at her the same way as before. Nor would he be able to cherish her the way he used to. Sabrina and Alexander were opposites in many respects: academics, extracurricular activities, and personality. Sabrina was a strong student, while Alexander did not, though he had no health or substance abuse issues. His difficulties were with his studies. This caused conflict with his father. Initially, they gave him a chance, but his grades continued to decline. He managed to complete only one semester, then, his academic performance plummeted, resulting in failed exams. He had previously worked at the university food court but eventually quit that job as well. Alexander always dreamed of opening his own business, but he didn't know how to achieve it. At the end of the semester, when the children returned to their parents' house for the summer, Jan learned about his son's problems with his studies. Alexander, unable to hold back, he decided to take drastic measures. He gave Alexander an option: find a job or move out if he didn't want to continue studying. At that moment, Alexander felt a betrayal that hurt. On the morning of June 15, 2021, everything seemed routine. The neighbors had no idea that just a few doors away, in a house basement, lay the body of a man who had been shot. At 8:23 a.m., Alexander called 911, reported encountering a weaponed man at his home. He said the intruder came up from the basement, where his father, Jan, was staying. The intruder then shot his entire family and injured him. When the officers arrived, they discovered a blood-soaked scene, with 3 bodies in different rooms. Doctors later confirmed that Jan, Melissa, and Sabrina were all deceased, each suffering from multiple gunshot wounds. They had been shot at point-blank range, with a total of 10 bullets fired. The police searched the property and quickly found a Browning .22 semi-automatic rifle, which had been used in the crime. Surprisingly, the neighbors had neither heard nor noticed the gunshots. During the investigation, detectives discovered that Jan had left a rifle on the fireplace, making it easily accessible. It was used in the family's murder. He had left it there after cleaning it the previous day. Normally, the rifle was stored in a locked gun cabinet. It is believed he was taking the stairs to the basement when he was shot. The killer then shot him 2 more times in the head. The killer proceeded to Sabrina's bedroom and shot her in the chest and stomach. Finally, he found Melissa's mother in the main bedroom and shot her in the head, leaving her body on the floor. Alexander described the attacker as a dark-skinned man, wearing green sneakers and black clothing. During the investigation, investigators found no signs of forced entry and no valuables were missing. The shooter's motive and method of entry into the house remained unclear. Investigators quickly questioned all the neighbors and collected CCTV footage. Reviewing the footage revealed that no one entered or left the house, caused many doubts about Alexander's testimony. The house was isolated, located on a hill with only one access road. Behind it were bushes that police thoroughly searched, looking for a hidden escape route for the attacker, but found none. Detectives begin investigating family matters and discover that Alexander has recently clashed with Jan and has a strained relationship with Melissa and Sabrina. He admitted to these issues, and it was speculated that the motive could be an inheritance of around $2 million. He was evidently hiding something, which was the first suspicion of the police officers. After being wounded, he was taken to the hospital for medical care, and the officers continued to interrogate him during the ride. Many of his statements were inconsistent. For instance, he initially told dispatcher 911 that all members of his family were shot, except him. However, in the ambulance, he appears surprised to learn that his sister, Sabrina, has also died. Alexander claimed he slept until 8 a.m., but it was discovered that his social media was active at 6 a.m., contradicting his story. Additionally, a pool of blood was found next to his bed, and forensic examination determined that he had shot himself in the leg at that spot, then bandaged the wound, went downstairs, and met the police. This contradicted his claim that an attacker shot him while he was downstairs. The nature of the wound made detectives suspicious, as the examination showed he shot himself in the leg. The bullet's trajectory and skin burns indicated a close-range shot. Detectives don't believe that a stranger who shot Alexander's entire family would leave him alive. The police tried to persuade Alexander to confess, but he continued to maintain his innocence. After recovering, he was arrested and sent to prison. Bail was set at $3 million, but he did not have that much money and remained in custody. He was charged with the murder of Sabrina, Jan, and Melissa. There was no doubt that Alexander was guilty. He is the only one in the family alive and had a motive. However, for the trial, physical evidence was needed. So investigators continued to collect evidence. According to police, since the 1982 Sitter Pizza case, this is the next known triple murder. The massacre shocked local residents, especially those close to the Jackson family. Their family has lived peacefully in their suburban home for 10 years, and everyone has always felt the family is very united. Part of the trial was conducted via online video because Alexander was recovering from injuries, but he later appeared in court. During the video, he was seen using crutches. The initial investigation focused on the gun used in the murder, which had 3 fingerprints on it. One of them was a fingerprint of the left palm, completely intact and matching Alexander's fingerprints. The second fingerprint is the fingerprint of the right palm, slightly blurred, also matching his. The third fingerprint was too blurred to be recognized. Fingerprints on the rifle suggest it may have been cleaned after killing the Jackson family. Alexander then picked up the gun, pointed the barrel at his feet and shot himself, leaving fingerprints that he did not wipe off. According to experts who spoke at the trial, this rifle has a very special loading and firing mechanism. Even experienced weapons experts have to spend a lot of time and effort to fully understand this type of weapon. The chance that a random burglar, who somehow avoided all cameras, could enter the house, figure out how to use the rifle, load it, and shoot 3 people was extremely low. That seems hard to believe, especially since Alexander is a good shot. He learned to shoot as a scout, and his father also taught him at the shooting range using that exact rifle. law enforcement officers inspected the house's doors. It was a large residence with multiple entrances and exits, but police found no signs of forced entry at any of the entrances. Only the family members had keys to the house. The prosecution presented its version of incident as follows. Alexander had an argument with his father, Jan, about his academic problems. As a result, Jan told him to either move out or get a job. At that time, he had only $30 in his account. He had nowhere to go and didn't want to work, which became his motive for murder. He noticed that the rifle was easily accessible and saw this as his opportunity. In a fit of anger, he attacked and shot January, fearing that the rest of his family, Melissa and Sabrina, might witness his crime. He killed them too to eliminate any witnesses. He staged a fight, shot himself, and then called 911, claiming that a stranger with a rifle was responsible. The prosecution argued that his fabrication of the robbery story showed he had malicious intent, and he carefully planned it, aiming to avoid responsibility for the murder. The defense argued that these were mere assumptions, not backed by solid evidence. Many witnesses, including neighbors, testified that none of the family members were violent. They had no issues with alcohol, drugs, or mental health. They were all known to be friendly and welcoming. The family has never been in trouble with the law. Many people disagreed with the police's theory that Alexander killed his relatives. Despite some disagreements, but he had no strong motive to harm his family. The lawyer highlighted that he had no history of mental illness or violence. He hasn't had any problems with the law, not even minor infractions like parking tickets. Alexander consistently denied killing his family. He claimed he was shot in the leg by a masked intruder while struggling to get the rifle back. At the time of the incident, Melissa was 68, Jan 61, Sabrina 19, and Alexander was 20 years old. On March 3, 2023, Alexander Jackson was found guilty of the first-degree murder of his family. He was sentenced to 3 life sentences, one for each family member he killed. According to the jury, the court denied him parole. He is under surveillance due to the high risk of ending his own life. This is a common practice in prison for new inmates with life sentences. His defense team immediately filed a motion to request a new trial, but their request was denied. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Katie Passiniti. Loretta had no interest in her child, Katie. Loretta was just 15 years old when her daughter was born. Right after the birth, Loretta abandoned her daughter, and the father's identity was unknown. Consequently, Katie's grandmother took her in and cared for her. They formed a strong bond, and Katie always thought of her grandmother as her mother. When Katie turned 15, her biological mother, Loretta, re-entered her life. At that time, Loretta was 31 years old and had been living with a man named Ernest later for almost 10 years, even taking his last name. Although they were never officially married, they referred to each other as spouses. Shortly after reuniting with her mother, Katie decided to move in with her and Ernest. However, the family reunion did not go as smoothly as hoped. Their life changed significantly when she moved in. As a teenager, she began to rebel. Her mother and Ernest had trouble communicating with her. She often ran away from home, attended parties, and only called parents by their first names. The family never developed a close relationship with her. The situation changed when Katie started college. She changed from a rebellious person to a more docile person. Being very intelligent, she was accepted into several prestigious institutions. She graduated with a degree in chemistry and earned a doctorate in applied mathematics from Johns Hopkins University. While still a student, she met a young man named Anthony Passiniti, who would later become her husband. Anthony recounted that she was the first person to approach him to ask for gum, which led to their acquaintance. Their friendship soon blossomed into a romantic relationship. A year later, Katie and Anthony got married, and 2 years after that, they had a daughter. At that time, she was 27 years old. The family eventually moved to San Antonio, Texas. Here, Anthony worked as a physician assistant, and he had good career prospects in the medical field. Katie taught chemistry and mathematics at several schools, earning a good salary. She had a stable career, but she decided to leave her job to become a mother again. Family was always important to her, so she decided to adopt a little girl. During this time, Katie tries to reconnect with her mother, Loretta. Even though they rarely communicated with each other before, but now they are both trying to get closer. Loretta began visiting Katie and grandchildren frequently. By then, Loretta was already retired. Loretta and Ernest lived on a 25-acre estate in a small town called Keithville. They built a log house and a large barn for agricultural equipment. Ernest manages a small farm, which was an excellent way to earn extra money during retirement. In 2008, a major change occurred. A local mining company exploited a large gas field on the farm. To obtain the extraction permit, Ernest was paid $400,000, and overnight, made him quite rich. He invested the money in his own business. Since he already had everything he wanted, he continued managing his small company as usual. Everything seemed normal, but a new problem arose. One day, Loretta called Katie and asked her a strange question. She couldn't remember how much sugar she needed for the cake. From that moment on, her calls became increasingly strange. It seems that with age, she began to have memory problems. The same happened to Ernest. One day he went with Loretta to their daughter's house, Katie, for Thanksgiving. But halfway there, he suddenly stopped. It seemed that he became disoriented and got lost. Then, he turned the car around and went back home. After these incidents, Katie sent Loretta and Ernest to the hospital for examination. The doctors diagnosed they with the onset of dementia and Alzheimer's disease. Katie still keeps in regular contact with Loretta, calling her almost every day, as she was very worried during this time. To help with the housework, they hired Tina Van Moer-Keek, who moved to the farm with her husband, Chris, and their child, living in a trailer. Tina became Loretta's personal assistant and driver, as Loretta had completely lost her ability to drive. Meanwhile, Chris helped with the housework for the Luttrell family and worked on the farm where Loretta and Ernest lived. Ernest and Loretta's health rapidly deteriorated. Their memory issues became more severe, so they need more maids to do housework. They were frequently busy dealing with various matters. Ernest became irritable, visibly losing his memory. His awareness became muddled, and he became more aggressive. He blamed the neighbor for all his troubles. Katie has talked about this many times. In April 2010, Ernest went to his house and accused his neighbors of trespassing on his property, leading to a scandal that got out of hand. Katie, who was visiting Loretta, called the police and reported that Ernest had threatened to kill his neighbor. Sheriff's deputies detained Ernest and took him to the nearest medical center, where he underwent a psychiatric evaluation and received treatment for a while. His condition was poor, and upon arrival at the medical center, he was confused and did not know why he was brought there. While Ernest was in the hospital, Katie decided to help her mother, Loretta, solve the problem. She went to the medical center and presented a power of attorney over Ernest's property, which he had supposedly signed earlier. Katie insisted that Ernest remain in a nursing home for Alzheimer's treatment, as his behavior was unpredictable and aggressive. She felt that he could be a danger to himself and to others. However, he denied having threatened his neighbor or having had a conflict. According to him, he did not understand why he was in a medical facility and demanded to be sent home. The situation was unclear. Had Ernest really signed the power of attorney and just forgotten, or is there another motive in this? However, Katie kept him in the hospital for observation for a week to determine what was wrong with him. Throughout this period, even without treatment, he remained completely clear-minded. Ultimately, Ernest was discharged from the hospital because there was no reason to keep him there any longer. Shortly before noon on July 25, 2010, Loretta called 911. She reported that her husband, Ernest, had passed away. At first, it seemed like a typical report of someone who had died of natural causes. However, there was a hint of unease in her voice. The emergency services dispatcher asked Loretta to try to give artificial respiration to Ernest. However, she replied that it would no longer help and asked the rescuers to come with the police as soon as possible. The sheriff's deputies arrived at the crime scene within minutes. Outside the house, they found Loretta. It was known that she suffered from Alzheimer's. She encountered the police and seemed more confused than upset. She obviously didn't know what to do. The officers entered the house to investigate and discovered the body of Ernest in a pool of blood. Doctors confirmed his death, caused by 5 gunshot wounds. According to Loretta, when she returned home from church, she found the body of her husband Ernest lying in a pool of blood. She did not know what had happened to him. Her statement was confirmed by other parishioners. Indeed, she had been at church. Reinforcements were called to the scene. When the forensic experts arrived, they immediately began examining the crime scene and collecting evidence. They noticed that some valuables were missing from the house, including Ernest's car. Near the place where the car had been stolen, they found unusual boot prints with a unique design. Tina, the housekeeper, and Chris lived on Ernest's farm. They claimed they were not at the house during the murder and provided a store receipt as proof of their whereabouts, which confirmed their alibi. Meanwhile, detectives reached out to Loretta's closest relatives. They later learned she had a daughter, Katie, who lived in San Antonio, Texas. Upon hearing the tragic news, Katie traveled to support her. Investigators are currently having difficulty clarifying the incident. What happened at the farm that day? At the scene, police confirmed that Ernest had died tragically. It certainly wasn't him who ended his life, as there was no weapon nearby. Someone had killed him, and the gun was hidden by the killer. Finding the gun became a priority for the investigation because it could offer important clues. Ernest was shot at point-blank range, including in the head, leaving no chance of survival. He was found lying in a pool of his own blood, and the gun cabinet next to the room had been opened and emptied the ammo. Additionally, Ernest's pickup truck and several valuable items were missing. The truck was easy to locate because it had distinctive features, including a homemade fuel tank. Ernest used this tank to refuel his agricultural equipment. It had a large capacity, designed to supply equipment for 2 days. Thanks to these unique features, the truck was quickly found. Eric Crane was well acquainted with the police officer because he abused illegal substances. He had a rich criminal history, mainly due to his addiction and drunk driving. All his life, Eric was in and out of prison for short periods of time. He was found just 2 days after the murder. He was immediately arrested in the car and taken to the police station for official questioning. However, he began to categorically deny his involvement in the incident. He claimed that he was at work at the time, but his alibi was not confirmed by his colleagues. Besides, he also could not explain how he ended up driving Ernest's pickup truck. His boots had a unique pattern on the sole, resembles shoe prints found at the crime scene. However, at first they could not get him to confess. Eric was kept in custody during the investigation because it seemed he was pretending and not telling the truth. On the day he was arrested, a local TV crew found out and went to the auto repair shop where he worked. They interviewed his manager and colleagues, who revealed that he was absent from work at the time of the murder. Surprisingly, while they were there, the shop manager received a call from Eric, who was calling from prison. Eric informed his employer that he was in trouble and couldn't come to work. He also asked his boss to lie to the police, saying he was at work at the time. His boss then asked if he had really killed Ernest. Then, he shared a shocking story. He admitted to pulling the trigger and shooting Ernest, but claimed he was persuaded to do so by Tina, an employee who was also Loretta's driver. It turned out that Tina and Eric were lovers, and she had asked him to help with the crime. He claims that Loretta is the one behind it all. Eric claimed that Loretta lied and went to church during the crime to create a false alibi. She waited there until Ernest was killed. Afterward, Eric called Tina from prison to discuss details of the crime. A few hours later, a recording of this conversation reached the police station. Investigators needed to verify if Eric was truthful, if Tina and Loretta were involved in the murder. On July 28, Tina was brought in as a suspect. She denied any involvement and claimed ignorance of the incident, but her motives remained very suspicious. Ernest had always been very kind to Tina's, providing housing for her family and giving her a job with a stable income. In her situation, it would be wise to maintain this relationship for as long as possible. Why would she kill her benefactor? It seemed illogical. However, detectives suspected she was lying. To confirm, they searched her belongings and found a bank card belonging to Ernest in her purse. Checking the database, the police discovered that months before the murder, Ernest and Loretta had filed a complaint against Tina for stealing money. Eventually, they decided to forgive her without prosecution. Tina confesses that she continues to steal Ernest's money. Her husband, Chris, revealed that the night before the crime, she did not stay at home because they had a fight and she went to a hotel. It turned out that Tina had spent the night there with Eric, planning the attack on Ernest. After several hours of interrogation, she confessed that Eric murdered Ernest, but she claimed that Loretta was the mastermind. Loretta had approached Tina, saying that Ernest should die. Initially, she refused, but Loretta coerced her into participating. The motive for the crime was financial. Shortly before his death, Ernest had promised to pay off his granddaughter's tuition debts, i.e. Katie's daughter. The granddaughter was at risk of being expelled over a $50 shortfall, and Katie was struggling financially. However, when it came time to fulfill his promise, Ernest refused to pay the $50. Loretta was so angry that he was so stingy that she thought he deserved to die. Afterwards, Loretta asked Tina and Eric for help, promising to pay $11,000. The crime was meant to look like a robbery, so Loretta allowed Eric to take Ernest's gun and personal belongings. Consequently, the gun and several valuables were missing from the house. Eric stole the murder weapon from their home and then disposed of it. Of course, Tina and Eric's testimony was not enough to arrest Loretta. Before arresting Loretta, Tina was asked to call her. Her task was to talk to Loretta and try to get Loretta's to confess. She agreed because she wanted to make a deal with the prosecution to reduce her sentence. She also needed to testify against Eric and Loretta. Then, she phoned Loretta, the police recorded and listened to the call. According to the plan, she said that Eric would be released on bail in an hour. So, she needed $1,000 to cover his bail costs. Loretta agreed to pay and asked for more time to get the money. This provides evidence of Loretta's relationship with Tina and Eric, but could not obtain a confession to the murder. Ernest's funeral was held on July 29th. After the ceremony, Loretta was arrested as she left the cemetery. She was accused of hiring Eric to kill her husband, Ernest, and taken to the police station for questioning. Despite the accusations, she denied any involvement. The police pressured her, claiming she attended church that day, knowing Ernest would be killed. They alleged that she had orchestrated the crime. However, she remained firm, stating she attends church every Sunday. She also acted confused, repeatedly asking what she was guilty of. There is no concrete evidence against her, other than a phone call. It doesn't prove much. Loretta repeatedly claimed that she was always in church during the time of the crime. She mentioned her Alzheimer's disease and called the idea of her killing her husband absurd. She suggested that Tina, who had previously stolen money, may be involved in Ernest's murder. However, she denied any involvement herself. Her daughter, Katie, supported her claims and often shared this perspective with journalists. Even Ernest's family believed Loretta was not involved, pointing to her harmonious relationship with Ernest over the years. However, they later informed the police that they suspected Katie and insisted Katie should be more thoroughly investigated. It seems money is the motive. Ernest's farm was valued at around $1.5 million. Upon his death, the farm would pass to Loretta, and after her death, it will be passed on to Katie. Therefore, Katie focuses more on Ernest's assets. Because of this, Ernest's relatives decided to take the case to court. Nonetheless, Katie had a copy of Ernest's will, which allocated the property to Katie and her daughters, leaving the entire Ernest's family out of the inheritance. However, the dates in the will have many suspicious points. It was signed just 3 weeks before Ernest's death. His relatives believed it was either forged or that he was coerced into signing it while unaware of his actions. Consequently, they decided to contest the will in August 2010. By then, the investigation into Ernest's murder was nearly complete. There were 3 suspects: Loretta, believed to be the mastermind, Tina, an accomplice, and Eric, the executor of the plan. However, detectives suspected a 4th person might be involved. This was Katie, who had the strongest motive and stood to gain the most from the tragedy. Ernest's family insists that he will not pass on his inheritance to Loretta's stepdaughter, Katie. Ernest's family is certain that he wouldn't leave his inheritance to Loretta's stepdaughter, Katie. Ernest was known for being very frugal, even stingy. He wouldn't spend money carelessly or leave his family without an inheritance. Besides, he never had a close relationship with Katie, so there was no way he would leave everything to her. While the prosecution was preparing to try Loretta, Tina, and Eric, Ernest's family filed a lawsuit claiming inheritance rights. By then, the battle over the inheritance had been ongoing for several months. As police looked into the details of the incident, they began to suspect foul play. The main goal is to prove that Katie's copy of the inheritance will is a forgery. The copy of the will bears the highly suspicious signature of a notary named Penny Penner. On October 19th, the police came to see Penny, the notary. She initially claimed that she had signed the documents on July 1st, nearly a month before Ernest's death. She stated that she signed them at home, in the presence of several witnesses, including Loretta. However, she later confessed that the will was indeed forged, as she signed it after Ernest's death. When pressured, she revealed that Katie had come to her after Ernest was murdered. According to Penny, Katie explained that Ernest had died suddenly without having time to properly draft the will and that he had no living relatives to claim the inheritance. Katie was concerned that her mother, Loretta, who suffers from Alzheimer's disease, will have difficulty registering property, resulting in the property belonging to the state. The notary Penny feeling sympathy for Katie. She did not investigate the true circumstances and decided to help her. However, facing criminal charges, she chose to disclose the truth to the investigators. To avoid legal issues, she agreed to assist the detective by making several phone calls to Katie. Her task was to get Katie to confess to forging the documents. Following the plan, she called Katie, claiming she had problems with the police and needed details of the incident to draft a new document to distract the investigation. Katie answered several questions, which led to her conviction for involvement in the forgery of the will. The police had enough evidence to search Katie's house in San Antonio. They came to search for documents related to her forging of the will. When the officers entered, Katie reached for her purse. Fearing she might have a weapon, they handcuffed her. However, the purse contained no gun, only a letter with instructions for creating a fake, which she intended to destroy. In the house, they discovered boxes of documents, including copies of power of attorney for the house and notes regarding Ernest's health. It appeared she had been monitoring him for a long time, possibly waiting for the right moment to act. The police hoped to find evidence that she was involved in Ernest's murder, but they found nothing. Investigators suspected she had planned the murder with Loretta, but lacked direct evidence. Ultimately, they had to release Katie and remove her handcuffs. However, they did not give up. Instead, they decided to change their approach. After visiting Katie's house, the investigators decided to change their approach. Meanwhile, Loretta had been in jail for a long time without bail. Her Alzheimer's disease was worsening, and she was declared incompetent to stand trial due to her health. Consequently, she was sent to a psychiatric hospital for criminals indefinitely. During this time, she confessed, but her confession was not considered significant because of her condition. At the trial, the prosecution doubted that Loretta could have planned the crime alone. It seemed clear that she had assistance, probably from her daughter, Katie. After that, investigators focused on Eric Crane. In June 2011, he pleaded guilty to the crime in exchange for life sentences without the possibility of parole, thus avoiding the death penalty. As part of the deal, Eric was required to testify against everyone involved in the crime. Then, the detectives pressured Tina by threatening that they would find a way to get her the death penalty. This pressure was enough to make her confess. She pleaded guilty and agreed to testify against the other conspirators. Her interrogation was recorded on video, exposing criminal activities. Tina revealed that Loretta planned the crime and convinced her to kill Ernest. Katie was also aware of the plan and conspired with Loretta. In return, Loretta promised Tina that she and her family could live in Ernest's house indefinitely. More than a year had passed since Ernest's murder, and finally, the investigation had gathered all the necessary evidence. On March 2, 2012, the police returned to San Antonio and went to Katie's house. They forced their way in, breaking down the door. Katie's husband watched as she was handcuffed and taken away. On April 25, 2013, Katie appeared in court. She accused of committing murder in July 2010. She faced the possibility of life imprisonment without parole. The prosecution argued that her sole motive was to take over Ernest's farm. At first, she intended to put him in a nursing home to take over the house. She planned to fabricate a story about a scandal with the neighbors, then trick him into signing the power of attorney. When this plan failed, she allegedly turned to a more violent alternative. By this time, Loretta's Alzheimer's disease had progressed, but Ernest remained in good health. Katie had always had a poor relationship with him, and it was clear that he would deny her an inheritance if her mother, Loretta, died first. This gave her a motive to eliminate him, with one theory suggesting the murder was staged to look like a failed robbery. At trial, Tina claimed that she was forced to participate in the case without any other choice. She stated that Katie pressured and threatened her, trying to persuade her by promising payment. However, Tina's testimony was not convincing to the prosecutor's office. The prosecution's other key witness was Eric. Contrary to expectations, Eric testified that discussions about the murder plan only involved Tina. He claimed he never discussed it with Katie or Loretta, but suspected Loretta's involvement. Later, he added that if Katie had been involved, he would have known, but he was hearing about her involvement for the first time. The defense presented arguments to prove Katie's innocence by focusing on document forgery. According to the lawyer, Katie had indeed used a notary's services to prevent her mother from receiving an inheritance, but this has nothing to do with the murder. Loretta did not attend the hearings due to health issues. The prosecution played a recording of Loretta's testimony where she admitted involvement in the murder, but she didn't mention anything about Katie. On May 14, 2013, after just an hour and a half of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict. Katie Passiniti was convicted of conspiracy to commit murder and forging multiple documents. She received a life sentence without parole. As they left the courtroom, Ernest's family thanked each juror for their decision. They succeeded in contesting the will and inherited Ernest's entire estate. Despite this, Katie continued to assert her innocence, visibly shocked and fearful after the verdict. Tina, who cooperated with the prosecution, avoided the death penalty but was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Loretta continued her treatment until her death and never appeared in court. Crime enthusiasts, are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Jennifer Wartz. After Rebecca and her husband divorced, she and her daughter, Jennifer, moved to the Somerset Tower residential area. She purchased an apartment in a 7-story building in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. Jennifer felt that her mother was having a hard time during this period, and she thought that it had something to do with her parents' divorce. However, Rebecca's loneliness didn't last long. She soon met Charles, a worker at the complex, and they began a romantic relationship. Charles was an eccentric and cheerful man who often joked around. Before long, Charles moved in with Rebecca. Initially, she felt this was a positive change after the emotional hardships of her divorce. She appeared to enjoy her new relationship. However, Charles's behavior soon became concerning. His mood swings were drastic. He could go from laughing hysterically to becoming angry. He started to seem unpredictable and strange. Charles worked on weekends, and during this time, Jennifer saw the true nature of he. Charles began harassing her and quickly progressed to sexual violence. At just 7 years old, Jennifer realized that something terrible was happening. Little girl mustered the courage to tell her mother, Rebecca, about it. However, Rebecca didn't believe her daughter. Rebecca dismissed her claims, telling her that she was imagining things, which caused she to resent her mother. Rebecca never took any action against Charles, not even to investigate her daughter's allegations. As a result, the abuse continued regularly. Jennifer felt so miserable that she didn't want to go home after school because her mother was not supportive. This situation persisted for 3 years. On February 26, 1991, police contacted Rebecca to ask for information about her missing neighbor, Dee Rosenthal. Detectives interviewed everyone in the area to gather information about Dee. That same day, they also questioned a local rapist named Charles. He surprised them by claiming he did not know Dee, despite the fact that they had been neighbors for a long time. As an employee of the complex, he should have seen her regularly at work. Dee Rosenthal, 32, is a therapist who specializes in supporting children with autism. Her colleagues, patients, neighbors, and family all spoke highly of her, indicating that no one would wish her harm. Dee had moved from Canada to the United States less than a year before her disappearance. Witnesses reported seeing her for the last time on February 22, and since then, there had been no leads. Investigators spoke not only with neighbors but also with Dee's family. Her brother, Blaine, mentioned that Dee had aspirations of attending the Alvin Institute in Philadelphia, a dream she had since college, which motivated her move to the U.S. The Alvin Institute is a specialized clinic designed to help children with autism. Blaine expressed disapproval of Dee's decision to move to the United States, feeling that it was a harsh place and very different from Canada and their familiar traditions. He admitted to the police that he tried his best to prevent her from leaving for a foreign country, but she was very determined, took everything for granted, and believed she would be able to return home soon. Witnesses reported seeing a woman who resembled Dee, but identified her as Lori. Unfortunately, Dee's leads did not yield any results. Ultimately, his hopes were not realized, and Dee vanished without a trace. At the beginning of the investigation, the police focused on two suspects, both of whom worked at the apartment complex where Dee disappeared. The first suspect was Steve Gomez, Dee's boyfriend. The second was Charles Reddish, the man known locally as Crazy Charles. Both men appeared suspicious, but the police lacked concrete evidence against them. Despite this, they remained on the investigators' radar. Charles claimed he spent the entire day on February 22nd with his mother and a young girl named Jennifer. Little girl confirmed his alibi, stating he was with her the whole time. The police could not find any evidence to charge Charles. However, some detectives noticed Jennifer's fear when they mentioned him. This caught the attention of investigators, but they could not take any action against Charles without further evidence or testimony. The Wirtz family experienced several years of suffering and humiliation after a mysterious incident, which ultimately led them to move out of the apartment complex. While this may make people suspicious, the act actually stems from anxiety about the possibility of a crime happening around them. Many residents chose to leave for their safety because rumors of Dee's disappearance had spread quickly. People were eager to distance themselves from the possibility of living near a potential criminal. Meanwhile, detectives continued their investigation. As they gathered more information, they encountered increasingly conflicting clues. Forensic experts examined the home of Dee, but found it completely empty. The apartment was clean and tidy, with no signs of forced entry or a struggle. However, the front door was unlocked, which was unusual for a missing person case. Despite their efforts, forensic experts found no evidence of blood. It appeared as if Dee had calmly left her apartment, as her belongings were untouched and her car was still parked outside. The only clue investigators discovered was an $80 check hidden in a diary, but there was no cash in her purse or wallet. All clues pointed to Dee having left her home voluntarily. Investigators learned that she had financial difficulties, often spending more than she earned and have a lot of debt, but these problems do not appear to be serious enough to involve kidnapping or murder. However, it raised the question, did Dee leave to escape her creditors? After interviewing all of Dee's neighbors, detectives uncovered a concerning claim from one elderly woman. She reported that on February 22nd, around 4 a.m., she was awakened by a loud thud from the ceiling, which she later realized was caused by Dee, her upstairs neighbor. The sound startled her, but after a brief silence, she assumed it was just something that had fallen and returned to sleep. Meanwhile, all the other residents provided no useful information, leaving the investigation at a standstill. Dee's sudden disappearance captured public attention, and the media began extensively covering the story. However, due to a lack of evidence, the case remained unresolved for years. The Wirtz family later moved into a new home north of Cherry Hill. Rebecca and Jennifer felt so sad for Dee, but they never knew what happened to her. Over time, they, like others, gradually forgot about Dee, including the police, who suggested she might have returned to Canada. Dee's brother Blaine is not satisfied with this explanation and continues to search for her. Unlike everyone else, he is the only one who doesn't give up. He's frustrated by law enforcement's inability to provide answers or locate Dee. He spent years visiting local bars, restaurants, and neighbors' apartments around Hill 67, interviewing anyone who might have information. Eventually, Blaine admits that his relentless search has become a kind of obsession, causing him to lose almost everything, including his family. One day, upon returning home from another search, his wife told him she wanted to break up, marking the end of their relationship. Life was challenging for the Wirtz family after they moved to a new home. They understood why Charles was called crazy. He often acted inappropriately and hurled insults at Rebecca and Jennifer. His aggression was escalating, and although Jennifer never witnessed he physically harmed her mother, Rebecca, but little girls suspected that her mother was also suffering from his abusive behavior. However, they stayed together and Rebecca endured the troubles of the relationship. For years, Jennifer suffered from the pain of his abuse, and little girl knew her mother was enduring the same. Despite everything, Rebecca was not ready to leave him. Jennifer spent a lot of time trying to convince her mother, Rebecca, to leave Charles. Eventually, little girl succeeded in persuading her mother that their toxic relationship needed to end. They planned an escape and decided to move in with Jennifer's grandmother, a place Charles had never visited, which would keep them hidden. Jennifer was thrilled with this plan. Little girl looked forward to being free from Charles, the man who had tormented her for so long. It seemed like they were on the verge of freedom. However, Rebecca made a critical mistake by inadvertently revealing their plans to Charles. It was Jennifer's last day at school. Following Rebecca's request, little girl had secretly packed her belongings in advance and hidden them. According to their plan, Rebecca was supposed to pick her up after school around 6 p.m., right after she finished playing field hockey with her friends. When she went to the parking lot, she was surprised to see not her mother driving, but Charles, and her mother sitting in the passenger seat. Angered, she yelled at her mother, feeling frustrated that her mother never kept her promises. In response, Rebecca simply told she to get in the car and calm down. Inside the car, an eerie silence fell. Jennifer felt a sense of foreboding throughout the journey. Charles watched her intently through the rearview mirror, and she dreaded what awaited her at home. Jennifer worries that he has bad intentions to keep her and her mother by his side. When they got home, Charles seemed normal. He said he wanted to have a farewell party before they left. But Jennifer didn't buy it. Her fears were confirmed when they entered the house and found no dinner prepared. Confused, little girl asked about it, but he stammered a vague explanation, then abruptly stating he needed the car keys to buy groceries and rushed out. Desperate, Jennifer urged Rebecca to seize the moment and escape before Charles returned, sensing something was off. However, Rebecca dismissed her concerns and told her to wait for he to return. He has a surprise for them. Frustrated, Jennifer retreated to her room, lay down on her bed, and eventually fell asleep. In the middle of the night, Jennifer was jolted awake by a loud noise around 2 a.m. Alarmed, she couldn't ignore it any longer. She got up and began to descend the stairs, the noise growing louder. When she reached the doorway, she realized something terrible was happening. The sounds were like violent blows, and little girl felt helpless, not knowing how long this horrifying scene would continue. Rebecca was lying on the floor, while her attacker, Charles, leaned over her, striking her repeatedly. Suddenly, he turned around and saw Jennifer. He grabbed the little girl by her hair and dragged her into the living room, where the violence was happening. As he pulled she past Rebecca, she saw something horrifying. Her mother's face was so badly injured that she could hardly recognize her. Rebecca, 43 years old, had a shattered jaw and a broken arm, and she showed no signs of life. To Jennifer, it looked like her mother was dead. Desperate, Jennifer pleaded with Charles not to harm them and to let them go. But he threw her into a chair in the living room, positioning her directly in front of Rebecca. Then, he picked up a small axe from the floor and slowly approached Rebecca. Panicking, little girl screamed for him to stop. She could hear her mother's labored breathing and realized her mother was still alive. But soon, there were more blows, and he attacking her mother. He was literally chopping into Rebecca with the axe. The smell of blood filled the air. Then, he pulled the sheet off Jennifer and dragged her upstairs to the bedroom. There, he tortured and raped her for 2 to 3 hours. Little girl was powerless to resist and simply prayed for it all to end. After Charles finished his torment, he sat next to Jennifer on the bed. She was badly injured and covered in blood, but she was still alive. Then, he asked her to kill him. Jennifer replied that she couldn't do that. He suddenly declared that he would kill her and then end his life, as he didn't want to end up in prison. Terrified, Jennifer didn't want to take a life, even one as evil as Charles's. Although she felt helpless, she remembered methods she had seen in crime shows about negotiating with hostage takers, and she decided to apply them. Little girl focused on listening calmly to he. She aimed to show empathy, hoping to soothe him, and gradually convinced him not only to spare her life but also to reconsider taking his own. Jennifer advised Charles that it would be a good idea if he told the police the truth, saying that he had lost control and was acting erratically. Besides, he could also negotiate with the prosecutor to get a reduced sentence. However, he, feeling uncertain, began pacing back and forth in the bedroom, holding a bloody axe. For the first time, he understood the severity of what he had done. Little girl managed to persuade he to surrender to the police, and then she called 911 for help. She was clearly in shock and found it difficult to express one's thoughts. Charles even assisted Jennifer's in getting up, dressing, and walking to the porch. The dispatcher informed them that the police were on their way, and they just had to wait. It's difficult to imagine what Jennifer was feeling during this time. She knew that he was unpredictable and could harm them at any moment. Despite this, little girl waited calmly for the police to arrive. Then, they quickly separated she from Charles. One of the detectives investigating Charles recalled his unusual reaction when asked about Rebecca's location. He vaguely stated she was inside the house and, when asked if she needed an ambulance, he claimed she can no longer be helped. Despite his assertion, it was clear that help was urgently required. A detective from the Cherry Hill Police Department arrived at the scene. This was the same officer who had investigated Dee Dee's disappearance 4 years ago. He remembered a repairman named Charles, who had caught his attention back then, and now he decided to question Charles's again. The police, along with Charles, entered the house equipped with a tape recorder to document the incident. They aimed to piece together the horrifying incidents that had taken place there. During the questioning, both the accounts of Charles and Jennifer aligned, until Jennifer disclosed the rape and torture that took place in her bedroom. Charles completely denied these allegations, he seemingly unable to accept the reality of what he had done to she. When the police mentioned the rape, he laughed, dismissing the idea of being intimate with Jennifer, a 14-year-old girl, as ridiculous. However, as the interrogation continued, he confessed to everything. Detectives from the Cherry Hill station suspect Charles has vital information about Dee Dee's case. Knowing that it was easy to get information out of Charles, they questioned him again about the disappearance of Dee Dee, who had been gone for 4 years. Their intuition was right, and he began confessing. He revealed that early one morning, he entered Dee Dee's apartment through the roof, descending onto her balcony. His intention was to rob and assault her. However, she caught him in the act. Then, in the struggle, he attacked her, raped her, and subjected her to mistreatment. He feared that she could identify him and report him to the police. To eliminate this risk, he decided to kill her. Charles explained that they fought on the bed, and during the struggle, Dee Dee fell to the floor. The loud noise of her fall was heard by a neighbor below. After that, he strangled her with a pillow and fled the scene. He had stolen $80 from her apartment, which the police found the next day. Subsequently, he returned to the scene, wrapped Dee Dee's body in a sheet, and transported it to the parking lot in a grocery cart. He also gathered her belongings and disposed of them in a nearby dumpster. After confessing to both murders, Charles led police to where he hid Dee Dee's body. But unfortunately, he couldn't recall the exact location. However, the police still believed him because he provided specific details about the crime that only the perpetrator could have known. He claimed to have taken Dee to the Delaware River area, and he disposed of the body in a spot known for frequent waste dumping. During the 4 years Dee's body lay there, thousands of tons of garbage accumulated, making the search extremely difficult. Despite extensive efforts, but the remains of Dee were never found, and the search was eventually discontinued. Charles faced 2 trials for the murders. After the search concluded, both cases were assigned to a prosecutor from Hill. Following the initial meeting with the lawyer, Charles, apparently on the advice of his defense attorney, withdrew his earlier confessions to the murders. In any case, a confession alone is not enough to result in a conviction in the state of New Jersey. To achieve a conviction, any oral confession must be accompanied by specific and credible evidence. This means that Dee's murder is unlikely to go unsolved, as the police have little evidence left other than an $80 check. 2 trials took place, one after the other, with Charles as the defendant in both cases. The first trial involved the murder of Rebecca Wartz and the torture of her daughter, Jennifer. During the trial, Jennifer demonstrated courage and composure as a witness, providing clear and concise answers. The forensic expert testified about Rebecca's severe injuries, which included at least 25 axe blows. Due to the overwhelming evidence against Charles, the jury delivered a guilty verdict after only 40 minutes of deliberation. As a result, Charles received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. The second trial involved the death of Dee Rosenthal and presented a more complex situation. Although the prosecutor aimed to achieve a harsher punishment, the difficulty lay in the lack of evidence at the crime scene, which Charles had meticulously cleaned up. Furthermore, Charles retracted his earlier confession and presented an alibi, claiming that Dee had simply moved away to start a new life. This new testimony gave Charles a chance to avoid conviction. However, the prosecutor tried to prove that Dee was not the type of person who would give up everything and go adventuring. She has completely devoted her love to taking care of autistic children and she cannot leave them. Her brother, Blaine, corroborated this, stating that she would have informed him if she had planned to leave. Furthermore, all of her belongings, including her documents, keys, car, and pet cat, were still in her apartment. In Charles's recorded confession, he claimed that Rebecca was the only person who knew about his involvement in Dee's murder. It is unclear why Rebecca chose to keep this a secret. Perhaps she was afraid of Charles or did not believe the truth. He stated in his confession, as well as in a previous conversation with his daughter, that he was under the influence of prohibited substances during both crimes. Charles Reddish was initially charged with Dee Rosenthal's murder in November 1995. 3 years later, in December 1998, he was convicted of the crimes he committed against Rebecca and Jennifer. By March 2001, he agreed to confess to Dee's manslaughter as part of a plea bargain with the prosecution. The terms of the agreement required he to reveal the location of Dee's body. However, at the last minute, he changed his mind and refused to comply. The prosecutor believed that he realized the extent of his crimes and was concerned about additional charges, which led to him changing his mind. Consequently, the plea bargain was withdrawn, and he went to trial again in October 2001. Charles again made false claims that Dee was still alive and mentioned a missing woman named Laura. However, the jury saw through the lie, and he was sentenced to death in 2002. But in 2004, the New Jersey Supreme Court overturned the death sentence. 1 year later, it was replaced with a prison term of 30 to 60 years, which was added to his life sentence for Rebecca and Jennifer. Unfortunately, the body of Dee was never recovered. After the trial, Jennifer was able to start a new life. She moved in with her cousin Shannon. She was finally able to live a peaceful life, free from the years of torture and mistreatment. She attended a Catholic school, joined a support group for young girls who had survived traumatic experiences. Her relatives provided significant support. As she grew older, Jennifer was able to come to terms with the traumatic experiences she had endured. She worked hard, built a successful career, started a family, and became a mother to 2 daughters. Blaine, Dee Dee's brother, held on to hope, despite his failure to find his missing younger sister. Blaine felt relieved to know that justice had been served, and especially that Charles was no longer causing harm to anyone because he was in custody. In tribute to Dee Dee, Blaine established a Canadian foundation in her name, focusing on supporting women who have endured physical and emotional abuse. Hello, crime enthusiasts, are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Sean Eckard. Donna and Samuel Eckard were a couple who were related before they got married. Both had experienced unsuccessful marriages before and had a total of 6 adult children. After a difficult past, they found peace with each other and decided to move to San Diego, California, to start a new life. There, they rented a spacious house and regularly attended local church activities on weekends. The family was very religious and lived a quiet life without much social interaction. A few years after moving, the family welcomed their first son, Stanley, and 2 years later, their second son, Sean. Donna devoted all her time to taking care of the house and raising the 2 children, so the boys grew up surrounded by love and care. Both attended a good local school. On weekends, the family participated in church activities. As adults, the 2 children left their parents to start their own family's acros. The country. However, the Eckard family still maintained a close relationship. They often contacted each other, called each other, and spent all their holidays together. Sean was a cheerful and easygoing boy. He was attractive, intelligent, and a good listener, so he made friends easily. In contrast, Stanley was a bit shy and found socializing difficult. He was often reserved about new things and had trouble communicating with his younger brother. Despite their different personalities, the 2 brothers were very close and cared for each other. They had the same group of friends and were always ready to help one another. Both were well-behaved and good at studying. The relationship between Sean and Stanley was very good. They trusted each other and often joked happily. Their parents also supported this relationship. In the family, mutual respect was highly valued. Donna and Samuel raised their children in the faith and the law of God from an early age. The Eckard family lived quietly. Vs. As they grew up, the 2 brothers developed very different interests. Sean, the youngest, played in a band, while Stanley, the oldest, loved martial arts. Every evening, the family gathered before dinner to share their experiences of the day. Sean was usually the first to tell a story, and stories about music, friends, and his future plans took up most of the time. Everyone listened attentively to Sean. Stanley, on the other hand, had few opportunities to share and did not feel like he had much to say. He had no big plans for the future, nor interesting stories or experiences with friends to hold attention. So Stanley often listened quietly to his younger brother's stories. One evening, Sean told his family about Mary Jane, his new neighbor. She was a beautiful young woman with bright brown eyes and long blonde hair. Sean was fascinated by the wonderful piano music coming from her house. Enthralled by the music, Sean boldly entered the house without knocking. Although the situation was somewhat awkward, Sean handled it with confidence and grace, making a good impression on Mary Jane. Although she was a few years older than Sean, they became close friends. Sean often organized picnics and invited Mary Jane to join. They went on many walks together, visiting parks and observatories. However, their budding romance was interrupted by the difficulties of adult life. The Eckard family received news that Donna, Sean's mother, was seriously ill. Sean's parents tried to consider the interests of everyone in the family when making a decision, but this completely changed their lives. Although Sean did not want to leave his hometown, friends, and Mary Jane, he was forced to accept his parents' decision. In 2005, the Eckard family decided to leave the city where they had lived for many years and move to another state. They settled in Donna's mother's house in the small town of Spring Hill, Florida. This decision brought many positive changes to the whole family. Donna began to recover. Initially, Sean felt sad about leaving the band, familiar places, and friends, especially Mary Jane. However, with his optimistic personality, Sean quickly adapted to his new life. Gradually, he realized that life in Spring Hill was as full and meaningful as in the old place. Donna and Samuel found stable jobs at the Presbyterian Church, where they spent most of their time. Donna worked at the nursery, taking care of children, while Samuel assisted at the chapel. Gradually, the two brothers regained their close relationship and made friends at their new school. Their lives seemed to be reborn in this new environment. Sean continued to join the school band, while Stanley attended a martial arts school near his new home. Despite his busy life, Sean could not stop thinking about Mary Jane. Every night after school, Sean would stay in his room and talk on the phone for hours. The conversations always ended with Sean promising to meet his girlfriend again. He promised to visit her as soon as his parents allowed it. While Sean kept his first love in his heart, his older brother Stanley tried to assert himself in the family. Stanley had a quiet and humble personality and seemed to receive little attention from his parents. In order to attract attention, he made many wrong decisions, which had serious consequences for the whole family. In May 2006, he informed his parents of his intention to drop out of school to pursue a martial arts career and open a martial arts club. However, due to the recklessness of youth, he joined a bad group, where he began to engage in petty fraud and experiment with illegal drugs. By 2007, bad relationships led to Stanley's arrest for theft and fraud. The news of his eldest son's wrongdoing shocked Donna, causing her to be hospitalized for a heart attack. Fortunately, the situation was quickly resolved with the help of a lawyer. This lawyer skillfully defended Stanley by pointing out the lack of direct evidence, helping him to be quickly released and receive only a suspended sentence. This incident left Stanley extremely scared, feeling guilty, hoping for sympathy and acceptance from his family. Meanwhile, after experiencing the terrifying events that happened to Stanley, Sean did not tell his parents about his decision. During the summer vacation, he worked as a waiter to save money. He then left a note for his mother, informing her that he was going to California to meet Mary Jane. The 2-day bus ride to Sean's lover seemed endless. The scenery changed, day turned to night, and Sean looked forward to meeting Mary Jane at the final destination. When the bus stopped, Sean eagerly ran to her, having seen her radiant face and long hair through the window. They spent the happiest days together, going on picnics like in high school. For the first time, Sean expressed his love to Mary, and she returned his feelings. After a walk, Sean and Mary Jane sat down on a bench. Suddenly, Sean felt dizzy, his vision went black, and he fainted. He was rushed to the hospital, his health rapidly deteriorating. Mary Jane contacted Sean's sister, Jennifer, who hurried to California. Doctors determined that the cause of Sean's rapid deterioration was a tick-borne disease. The disease developed suddenly and rapidly, causing many complications, including encephalitis. A grueling battle to save Sean's life began, with doctors working tirelessly for a long time to bring him back to health. After more than a month in a coma and 6 months of rehabilitation, Sean was saved. His recovery was arduous. It was surprising that a small tick bite during a summer walk could cause such a serious illness. Jennifer took her brother back to Florida for further treatment and long-term recovery. Mary Jane was forced to stay behind, only able to communicate with her boyfriend by phone. Despite the hardships and unexpected illness, these events brought the Eckard family closer together. Donna did her best to help her beloved son Sean overcome his serious illness. She closely monitored his diet and exercise regimen. This devoted care helped Sean recover completely, but also caused Stanley to gradually harbor resentment and jealousy. After recovering, Sean continued his music studies and graduated in 2009. He dreamed of introducing Mary Jane, his favorite, to his family. However, this plan did not work out. Instead, Stanley introduced his younger brother to Samantha Rowe. Samantha, a native of Florida, quickly became friends with the two brothers. Stanley was fond of her and sympathetic towards her, while she was attracted to Sean's cheerful and outgoing personality. For a while, Stanley actively pursued Samantha, and she reciprocated his interest. They had a few romantic dates, ending in passionate kisses. Stanley was very happy, but Samantha, despite accepting his advances, could not stop thinking about Sean. Samantha wrote Sean a text message expressing her emotional and inviting him to go for a walk. Sean agreed, and the wife spent the evening walking along the river, talking about Stanley and Mary Jane. Sean had no intention of winning Samantha over because he already had a girlfriend. After being rejected, Samantha sent Stanley a text message, falsely claiming that Sean had met her and confessed that he liked her. Stanley was very angry. That night, he went up to Sean's room and they talked. At first, they spoke quietly, then argued loudly, and finally fell completely silent. The parents did not intervene in the quarrel between the two brothers because they were used to it. It was the mother who first discovered Sean missing when he did not answer the phone. The night before, Stanley had explained to his mother that Sean had left after an argument. After 2 days of searching, the police received an unusual call from Sean's sister, Jennifer. In the call, they heard only a woman's screams and a man's moans in the background. After being asked repeatedly to calm down, Jennifer finally spoke clearly to the police. She was still screaming for help and reported that her brother Stanley had killed Sean. She said that Stanley was in the house talking to his mother and that Stanley's father, Samuel, was lying next to Sean's body. She pleaded for immediate help. The police arrived at the crime scene and found a horrific sight in the backyard. Samuel was on his knees, his hands full as he tried to pull his son's body from the wet ground. He screamed and wiped the dirt off Sean. The once peaceful neighborhood, with its beautiful lawns where the two brothers often waved to neighbors, had now become the scene of a tragedy. The Eckard family, who had happily raised 2 sons, now faced terrible grief. One son was dead, and the other was under arrest. Stanley was arrested on suspicion of murder. During his initial interview, he claimed he had no intention of killing his brother. In a fit of rage, Stanley had hit Sean in the head, causing him to fall and die. After realizing his brother was dead, Stanley White tied up the body and buried it in the backyard. During the investigation, Stanley said, "I buried him. After all, that's what you do with dead people." This statement sounded cold and emotionless, more like the words of a serial killer than those of a loving brother. To justify his actions, Stanley said that he did it for his mother, he wanting to protect her from the shock of hearing about Sean's death. Stanley planned to move and rebury his younger brother's body after their parents died. During the interrogation, Stanley displayed many different emotions. At times he cried, confessed, and showed remorse, claiming it was an accident. But at other times, he showed hatred and spoke harshly about Sean. He blamed his younger brother for all his troubles and admitted that Sean had won the competition for the love of their mother and Samantha. On the day of the incident, Stanley was charged with second-degree murder and held without bail. 2 days later, Dr. Barbara Wolfe performed an autopsy on Sean and submitted the forensic report to the court. The results showed that the victim had bruises under the skin and rope marks on his neck, indicating that he had been compressed, causing difficulty breathing. The cause of death was determined to be blunt force trauma to the head and asphyxiation. Assistant State Attorney Pete McGough investigated the case thoroughly. On February 25, 2011, the first hearing took place, with District Judge Stephen Rushing presiding. Stanley's parents, Donna and Samuel Eckard, sat in the second row, crying as they watched their eldest son being led into the courtroom. On April 9, 2013, Stanley Eckard's trial began in the Hernando Courthouse, with District Judge Anthony Taddy presiding. Attorney Alan Hunter represented the defendant, and Pete McGough was the prosecutor. The prosecutor tried to prove that Stanley had carefully planned the murder. The defense attorney argued that it was just a random fight that went horribly wrong. He also highlighted Stanley's attempts to conceal the crime as a sign of remorse. Stanley Eckard is charged with first-degree murder and could face life in prison if convicted. The trial is scheduled to last 5 days, starting May 13. Judge Anthony Taddy will make the final decision. If convicted of second-degree murder, Stanley could still face life in prison. Stanley Eckard has always maintained that he did not intend to kill his brother. 3 years ago, before burying his brother's body in their front yard, Eckard rejected a prosecutor's offer to plead guilty to second-degree murder in exchange for a maximum 20-year prison sentence. Eckard remained calm as the clerk read the verdict. The brothers' parents, Samuel and Donna, wept silently as the jury left the courtroom. Samuel Eckard's sobs turned to screams, and several relatives gathered around to comfort him. The jury agreed that Stanley did not intend to kill his 19-year-old brother, Sean, but they did not completely exonerate him. After about 2.5 hours of deliberation, the jury of 9 women and 3 men found Stanley Eckard guilty of second-degree murder. However, the Eckard family still believes Stanley's account of the events that occurred in the early morning hours of June 19, 2010, and criticized the state attorney's office for bringing the case. Samuel Eckard, Stanley's father, praised Chief Assistant Public Defender Alan Lanter for his good work in defending the case. The family questioned the appropriateness of the verdict and appealed, but their appeal was denied. Samuel expressed surprise that the jury reached its verdict so quickly but insisted that the family's belief remains unchanged. He also acknowledged one undeniable fact: after his younger brother died, Stanley dragged Sean's body out of his bedroom window and buried it in the backyard of their Spring Hill home. Samuel discovered Sean's body 2 days later. Assistant District Attorney Pete began his closing by showing the jury a photo of Sean's body rolled up in the dirt. Pete emphasized that this was not a cold case and pointed out that Stanley had changed his story several times when questioned about his younger brother's death. Pete went on to say that after Sean's funeral, Stanley forged text messages from Sean's phone, claiming he was in California with his girlfriend. Stanley also forged letters from Sean to Samantha, telling her not to contact him and to focus on Stanley instead. Finally, after hours of questioning, Stanley admitted that Sean had died in a fight in the bedroom. Stanley said he heard Sean's neck snap as they hit the floor. Stanley hid the body to protect his mother, who had heart problems, and planned to tell his father after she left for work. Pete concluded that Stanley caused the injuries that led to Sean's death, which constituted murder. He highlighted Stanley's statement to police about a dispute involving Samantha, as well as Stanley's conversation with his younger brother and a friend about revenge beef. Sean died. During that conversation, the friend said Stanley mentioned that if he wanted to kill someone, he would hit them in the back of the head and bury them in the yard. However, this evidence was not strong enough to eliminate all reasonable doubt. Alan Lanter, defending, argued that the crime did not involve a deliberate act. Stanley was involved in his younger brother's death, but it was not murder, he said. Alan cited the medical examiner's testimony, saying that the blow to the head, combined with the swelling of his brain from encephalitis, could have caused his death. The pathologist also confirmed that hitting his head on the nightstand and the two fell could have been enough to cause Sean's death. Finally, Alan reminded the jury of Donna Eckard's testimony, which stated that Sean had severe mood swings after suffering from encephalitis. In her testimony, Donna Eckard even called Sean's death an accident. The jury could have found Stanley Eckard guilty of third-degree murder or manslaughter, making this an excusable homicide case. Attorney Allen asked the jury not to let the gruesome images of Sean's body and Stanley's actions in burying it distract them from the real cause of his death. Stanley Eckard did a terrible thing after Sean died, but he was not a murderer, Allen stressed. During the final trial, Eckard's parents were devastated when Judge Anthony sentenced Samuel Eckard to 50 years in prison without parole. They felt as if they had lost both their sons on the same day. Hello again, true crime fans, we've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Sheila Labar. Sheila Labar was born in Fort Payne, Alabama on July 4, 1958. She was the youngest of 3 children and grew up on a farm surrounded by cornfields with her siblings, including her older brother and sister Lynn. According to Lynn, her older sibling, Sheila was an energetic, inquisitive, and creative girl. She loved being the center of attention, had a beautiful singing voice, and was very pretty. Her father Manuel Bailey's struggle with alcoholism had a profound impact on his family, especially his children, during their formative years. When affected, he became extremely aggressive and abusive, directing his anger at his wife and children. He would insult and humiliate them, attack them with any available object, and even force them to sleep outdoors, enduring the elements. Many times, Manuel's wife and children had no choice but to seek shelter in barns or fields, enduring harsh weather conditions such as heavy rain or freezing temperatures. Manuel's violent outbursts were a regular occurrence in the family. On one occasion, he threw dishes and objects at family members in a drunken rage. The mother tried to shield her children but was unsuccessful. A flower pot hit the youngest daughter, Sheila, in the head, causing her a severe concussion and leaving a permanent scar on her temple that she later covered with her hair. However, physical abuse was not the only trauma the sisters endured. According to Sheila and Lynn's memories, Manuel forced them into forced sex from a young age. Even though the mother may have known what was going on, she never addressed the problem or sought help for her daughters. Sheila studied very well, finding solace in her academic achievements in the midst of a difficult family life. She dreamed of escaping the countryside to pursue her ambitions in the city. With fierce determination and intense passion, Sheila aspired to realize her childhood dream in life and become an actress or a pop singer. She had everything for this: charisma, bright appearance, and a wonderful voice. Sheila's upbringing was tumultuous. At the age of 18, she left her parents' house, but adult life was difficult. She did not pass the university entrance exam because of her average grades, and she simply did not have the money to move to the big city. Therefore, Sheila took a job as a maid in a hotel where her sister worked. Sheila had a slim figure and a very attractive appearance, big blue eyes, a charming smile, and long, thick hair. She was given attention by men, and over time, she learned to use that attention and manipulate her suitors. Sheila met Jonathan Baxter in the late 1970s and they began a romantic relationship. Although Jonathan was not yet 20 years old, he had a young daughter from a previous relationship. However, the child did not become a barrier, and the couple soon married. However, their marriage did not last long and ended in divorce within a few months. The reason for the breakup was Sheila's treatment of Jonathan's daughter. She often became frustrated with the child and resorted to physical discipline, such as hitting her, or isolation, such as locking her in a closet when the child misbehaved or cried. When Jonathan discovered this, he was extremely distressed and immediately filed for divorce. He acted quickly, removing Sheila and her belongings from the house and making it clear that he never wanted to see or hear from her again. After the divorce, Sheila continued to date many men, and she often relied on them financially, but these relationships did not last long, lasting only a few weeks to a few months. However, in the early 1980s, she met Ronnie Jennings, who would later become her second husband. Their tumultuous love affair soon led to marriage. Unfortunately, it was an unhealthy relationship between two erratic and unstable people who often cheated on each other, caused scandals, and even fought. However, their marriage lasted more than 3 years. In 1984, after an argument, Sheila asked her husband for a divorce. But he refused. However, Ronnie's motive behind refusing her request was not to save the relationship. He just wanted to irritate his wife and drive her crazy. He succeeded. Sheila became hysterical, took a large amount of drugs in front of her husband, drank strong alcohol, and after this terrifying cocktail, got behind the wheel and drove off the road. As expected, Sheila lost consciousness shortly after and drove off the road at high speed, crashing into a tree. Despite the severity of the accident, Sheila miraculously survived, although she suffered severe head injuries that left her in a deep coma for over a week. During this time, medical professionals were unable to give any prognosis for her recovery. Sheila eventually recovered from her coma and was transferred to a psychiatric hospital, where she remained for several months. She later complained to her sister that one of the attendants was constantly harassing her. After all this, she was discharged from the hospital and returned to her second husband's home. But her behavior became increasingly erratic. She began to act aggressively and threaten him, culminating in a violent outburst in which she attacked Ronnie with nail scissors, stabbing him in the chest. Fearing for her safety and well-being, Ronnie filed for divorce and quickly moved away, ending their tumultuous relationship. After her second divorce, Sheila began looking for a lover through the dating columns of print newspapers and left her information there. She posted her information herself in the hope of meeting someone special, but her relationships did not last long. The reason was that she had a controlling personality, often dominating her partners in both her private and daily life. One day, a 60-year-old man named Wilfred Bill Labar happened to see her picture in the dating section. A twice-divorced man, Wilfred raised his children and grandchildren from previous marriages. After losing his wife a few years ago, he lived a solitary life on his large rural farm. Wilfred, a wealthy man from New Hampshire, owned a chiropractic practice and a horse farm. Despite his successful life, he still felt lonely and longed for a partner. It was then that he met Sheila, who was attracted by Wilfred's wealth and saw an opportunity for her. To attract his attention, Sheila began sending him provocative letters and photos through the post. Her plan worked and soon Wilfred invited her to visit his farm. Their romance quickly blossomed, with Wilfred showering her with expensive gifts. In the summer of 1987, Sheila moved in with him. Wilfred Bill Labar had no plans to marry Sheila, however. Without waiting for his proposal, Sheila changed her name, calling herself Labar. Bill was surprised by this development, but he did not object. As their relationship progressed, Sheila began to control Wilfred's life, including his business, finances, and property. Due to the significant age difference, Wilfred had a hard time satisfying Sheila's need for intimacy. According to Sheila, Wilfred allowed her to see other men and she often brought her lovers to their homes. One of Sheila's lovers, who was in his mid-90s, was a Jamaican citizen named Wayne Ernest. He was much younger than Sheila and was initially hired as a nanny at the farm. Wayne eventually moved into the main house with Wilfred's consent, possibly under pressure from Sheila. Sheila and Wayne married in 1995 with an agreement that they would be monogamous, and Wayne assumed that from then on, he would be her only man. However, he soon realized that he was wrong as his wife continued to see other men. Wayne was not happy with this, and one day, he punched and kicked Sheila and her next lover, injuring them. Sheila, accustomed to being dominated, was the first time she had been attacked by someone else. She eventually filed for divorce and obtained a court order to prevent Wayne from approaching her, accusing him of violence and assault. Sheila's life remained volatile despite the divorce, as she continued to have affairs, frequently ending old relationships in favor of new ones. However, her relationships became increasingly complicated, often ending in lawsuits from her ex-partners who accused her of cruelty, threatening their lives, and causing physical harm. In one case, an ex-boyfriend claimed she deliberately hit him with her car, narrowly avoiding serious injury. Another accused her of fracturing his skull, while a third partner was left permanently scarred by lacerations to his face. As Sheila got older, her behavior became increasingly dangerous to those around her. She demanded absolute obedience from her partners, and when this expectation was not met, she often flew into rages. Wilfred Bill Labar then died in 2000 of heart failure at the age of 74. Although doctors and police found no evidence of foul play in his death, his family believed that Sheila had something to do with it. According to them, she had been poisoning Bill little by little over the years, effectively driving him to his death. After Wilfred's death, Sheila became the sole beneficiary of his estate, even though the couple had never formally married. Relatives tried to challenge this through the courts, but never got anywhere. They still believe that Sheila forced him to write a will. She wanted the house after Wilfred's death. After inheriting his entire estate, Sheila was free to do whatever she wanted without having to consider anyone else's opinion. She called her home a place of glamour and pleasure, where there were no inhibitions. And she began picking up men on the streets, in bars, on the internet, luring them to her and then trying to keep them at the farm for as long as possible. She didn't care about their age, skin color, or appearance. Sheila lured these men with promises of extraordinary pleasure and then tried to dominate and control them. Neighbors noticed that there were many different men constantly coming to the farm, but many left that day, while others stayed for a short time. The activities inside the house were shrouded in mystery. Sheila then turned her focus to finding sexual partners among men who were in financial trouble, needed a place to live, or were struggling with addiction. These people are easy targets for Sheila's manipulation tactics, as she presents herself as a wealthy widow, bragging about her supposed inheritance from 2004. A homeless man named Michael DeLog is struggling with addiction when he meets Sheila on a city street. Due to his circumstances, his family tries to get him into rehab, but he escapes from the treatment center. Michael's weakness leads him to accept Sheila's offer, who promises him food, shelter, and the stimulants he desires in exchange for a physical relationship. Moving to the farm, Michael becomes completely dependent on his lover. Afraid of being on the streets again, he complies with her every demand, and Sheila's desires become more sophisticated. She binds, beats, and humiliates Michael, taking pleasure in it. He tried to escape several times, walking dozens of miles and hiding in homeless shelters, but he never decided to go to the police for fear they would not believe him. Sheila repeatedly found Michael and brought him back to the farm. In desperation, he tried to contact his family members and let them know he was in trouble. They responded immediately, but unfortunately, it was too late. In October 2005, Michael DeLog mysteriously disappeared. When his family contacted Sheila, she claimed that they had broken up and Michael had left her, not knowing where he was. Despite efforts to find him, Michael was nowhere to be seen and no one he knew had seen him. Unfortunately, attempts to contact him were unsuccessful and the police report was fruitless, and Sheila remained unsuspected. While her house and car needed maintenance, so she was forced to find work. She chose a career that suited her, becoming an operator for intimate telephone services, using her charming voice to make a living. A man named Kenneth County, then 24 years old, fell into the trap and agreed to meet her in person. Kenneth was an attractive young man, kind and open, but he had one major weakness: his low IQ made him extremely gullible. This made him Sheila's ideal target. Kenneth was very close to his mother, financially dependent on her, but Sheila skillfully manipulated him, creating a rift between them and finally conquered him. She gave him an unforgettable night of love and promised that they would be like this all the time. The young man decided that he had met the woman of his dreams. He informed his relatives, and then moved into Sheila's house. After that, Sheila severely and relentlessly abused Kenneth. She had turned one of the rooms in her house into a torture chamber, where she regularly beat Kenneth severely and subjected him to other forms of physical and mental abuse. As a result, Kenneth's body was covered in numerous injuries, including bruises, abrasions, cuts, and burns. Kenneth was completely under Sheila's control and was not allowed to contact his loved ones. His family had no idea what was happening to him and could only speculate about his condition. It was only when neighbors occasionally saw Kenneth and were shocked by his frail appearance that the alarm was raised. Just days before Kenneth went missing, a local store employee took a disturbing photo of him with his cell phone, which was later used as evidence in court. The photo showed Kenneth extremely thin, with large bruises under his eyes and on his cheeks, and what appeared to be a broken nose, judging by the extent of the healing. All of these injuries occurred at different times, suggesting that he had been severely beaten over a long period of time. When he went to a store, the items in his trolley were disturbing: 2 large fuel drums, which were later discovered to have been used to cremate him. The store staff were confused and frightened by his appearance, so they contacted the police, suspecting a possible domestic violence incident. However, Sheila escaped and they were unable to charge her. Eventually, Kenneth lost contact with his family, and when his worried mother visited him at the farm owner, Sheila, responded aggressively and advised her to leave Kenneth alone, prompting Kenneth's family to file a missing person report, expressing concern that he might be being held against his will at the farm. When the police arrived at Sheila's home, they witnessed a crematorium and disturbing discoveries. Sheila claimed that Kenneth had moved away because his mother, whom he said was afraid of him, had begun visiting regularly. To back up her claim, Sheila provided a recording in which she asked Kenneth if his mother had attacked him, and he quietly replied yes. The police found Sheila's story suspicious, and the next day, a police officer who visited Sheila obtained a search warrant for the estate. This was not the first time Sheila had attracted the attention of the police. She had been implicated in the mysterious disappearance of another boyfriend in the past. However, despite her past, Sheila had never been questioned or had her property searched until now. When the police arrived, they could not find Sheila at home, but they did notice several suspicious fires burning near the outbuildings. These fires were very unusual and involved a variety of materials such as mattresses, pieces of wooden furniture, hay, and other items soaked in flammable substances. Upon closer inspection, it was discovered that one of the fires contained human remains in the form of bones. Police immediately requested additional assistance from forensic experts to document their findings, but what they discovered next was even more shocking. Police found numerous blood stains that had not been cleaned up throughout the house, indicating a violent crime had occurred. The large amount of blood suggested that a horrific massacre may have occurred. The blood found at the scene belonged to at least 3 different people. The body found in the fire was identified as that of the missing Kenneth County. 2 empty fuel cans were discovered nearby, matching the cans Kenneth had purchased at a local store the day before his disappearance. Further investigation uncovered the body of Michael DeLog, who had been missing for several years. Police also found several fingers belonging to an unidentified third person. In addition, a large number of items, believed to have belonged to several men due to their varying sizes, were recovered from the farm's storage pit, but their owners remain unknown. Sheila was not present at the time of the police visit, as she had already discovered them and planned to flee. Sheila hitchhiked to Boston to evade arrest. Along the way, she hitched a ride with a driver and eventually formed a relationship with him, leading him to invite her to stay with him. However, the next day, after watching a TV news report about a manhunt for a dangerous criminal, the driver called the police and reported that Sheila was currently in his bed. A disturbing discovery was made during the search of Sheila's home, a collection of videotapes. The recordings depicted men, including Kenneth, Michael, and several others, confessing to serious crimes. However, the men's visible distress and condition suggested that these confessions had been coerced through torture. After Sheila was arrested, concerns about her mental health prompted the court to order an evaluation. The results showed that Sheila suffered from delusional disorder and symptoms of schizophrenia. She believed that she was an angel sent from heaven to protect children from rapists. Her attorney used her poor mental health to create a defense, portraying her as terminally ill and unaware of her actions. This claim was based on severe mental and physical trauma she had suffered as a child. Sheila claimed that, years earlier, she had had a near-death experience after being in an accident and falling into a coma. During this time, she said, she encountered God and was tasked with ridding the world of men who harmed children. Sheila's ex-husbands and several of her lovers also took the stand in court, all of whom described her as insane, unstable, and extremely violent. In particular, her third husband, Wayne Ernest, claimed that Sheila had repeatedly urged him to kill Wilfred Bill Labar, apparently motivated by his desire to take his estate. However, the defense team's efforts to portray Sheila as insane and in need of psychiatric care were unsuccessful. Instead, it was determined that she was fully aware of her actions when she committed the crime. Sheila was ultimately convicted in July 2008 and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Any appeals she filed were subsequently denied. Sheila is currently serving her sentence at the Homestead Correctional Facility in Florida. Hey detectives! Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Deborah Newell. Deborah Newell was a highly successful and affluent woman who had built her fortune through hard work and dedication in the interior design industry. After years of climbing the ranks, she founded her own design firm, Ambrosia, where she spent 3 decades pursuing her passion. Regardless her professional success, her personal life was a different story. She had been married 4 times, but each union ended in divorce. While she was a devoted mother to her 4 children, but her with an intense desire for a happier home life. A few years ago, her family experienced a tragedy. Her sister, Cindy, was brutally murdered by her husband, Billy Vickers, in March 1984. What's more heartbreaking is that their mother testified against Cindy and supported Billy throughout the trial. As a result, Billy spent only a few years in prison for his heinous crime. Deborah was deeply affected by the tragedy, leaving her with anxiety and lingering fear of guns. Despite being encouraged by friends to purchase a pistol for protection, she was unable to bear the thought of having a gun near her, and she lived alone for a long time. Deborah prioritized her physical appearance and lifestyle. She invested significant time and money in skin care, makeup, and hair, and surrounded herself with luxurious items from brands like Chanel, Cartier, Denham, and Gucci. Despite her beautiful life, Deborah felt incomplete without a loving partner. John Meehan was born on February 3, 1958, in California. He grew up with his sisters, Karen and Donna. John's life was influenced by his father, who taught him dishonest ways. This led John to get involved in scams, deal with illegal substances, and often have run-ins with the law, ultimately forcing him to leave California in 1988. After completing his undergraduate studies at Arizona State University with a Bachelor of Arts degree, John went on to join the law faculty at the University of Dayton. His striking looks, 6 feet and 3 inches, with hazel green eyes and dark hair, earned him the nickname Dirty John from his friends. He possessed a natural charm that effortlessly attracted women. After John finished his academic journey, he met Tanya Sells, a nurse anesthetist, and they got married in November 1990. Tanya was 25 years old, and John was 31. However, their relationship was built on lies, and John kept his family away from Tanya, telling her they were bad people. Tanya supported John's education as an anesthesiologist while attending medical school in Tennessee. She also helped him get his license to practice anesthesiology. The couple had 2 children, but their marriage began to fall apart over time. Tanya eventually discovered the truth about John's past from his mother and sisters. She also found out that John had been stealing pills from his patients and was addicted to them, which explained his cause of his short temper. Tanya immediately reported John to the police. After an investigation, John admitted his wrongdoing, but instead of surrendering, he left the state and went into hiding at a hotel in Michigan. However, the police found John easily and discovered him unconscious in his hotel room, surrounded by empty pill containers. An ambulance was called, but on the way to the hospital, John woke up, grabbed a medication, and jumped out of the ambulance. He was caught again and eventually sentenced to 6 years in prison in Michigan for resisting arrest and possessing illegal drugs. John spent just 17 months in prison. Then, his sentence was reduced and he was released in 2004. During this time, he met Deborah through online dating. John, then 55, and Deborah, then 59, had both decided to give online dating a try. Deborah was immediately drawn to John's profile, which pretended he was a divorced doctor and a Christian looking for love. Despite having a string of unsuccessful dates, Deborah was delighted to meet John in person. He showed genuine interest in her life and accomplishments, which made her feel appreciated. This was a refreshing change for Deborah, who had been disappointed by her previous dating experiences. John and Deborah's first date took place at a restaurant in Irvine, California, in October 2014. John's aim was to make a great impression on Deborah, which he achieved by sharing false stories about his past. He told her that he had worked with Doctors Without Borders in Iraq, had 2 children, and owned multiple properties. Deborah was captivated by the image of a selfless doctor who had dedicated his life to helping others. John treated Deborah with kindness and respect, making her feel like a queen. This was exactly what Deborah had been longing for, genuine affection. John's charming words left Deborah smitten, and she invited him to her penthouse after dinner. However, John crossed the line this time. After a few kisses, he tried to get intimate with Deborah, but she didn't feel comfortable, so she asked him to leave. The next morning, John apologized profusely, attributing his behavior to too much alcohol and an inability to control his emotions. This admission won back Deborah's trust, and their relationship continued to blossom. As their love progresses, Deborah and John spent more time together. On their 3rd date, he expressed his love for Deborah and proposed to her. She was thrilled with their connection and chose to overlook some red flags. One notable instance was when John wore worn and somewhat unclean medical scrubs to a charity event hosted by Deborah, claiming he hadn't had time to change. Despite this, Deborah proudly introduced him to her friends as her doctor, and they took photos together. Their connection deepened, and they eventually decided to move in together. Deborah's daughter Jason lived with her in the penthouse. Jason was unhappy with the men her mother was dating, and in particular, she had concerns about John. Jason found it unusual that her mother, who had impeccable taste and favored designer brands like Gucci, was in a relationship with someone who wore dirty, unkempt clothing. Jason noticed him showing curiosity about the artwork in her mother's apartment, almost as if he was determining its value. After only meeting for 5 weeks, John convinced Deborah that they should live separately, and they rented a house on Balboa Island's waterfront for $6,500 per month. Deborah paid $80,000 up front to cover several months of rent. However, John opted not to put his name on the lease, citing tax complications as the reason. Deborah was deeply smitten with John and took care of all the expenses, covering everything herself. Unbeknownst to her children, she couldn't understand why they didn't approve of he. John shows Deborah concern for her by making her coffee every morning, helping her with shopping, and generally making her life simpler. Deborah believed that she had finally found her ideal partner and was hopeful that her children would accept him. She envisioned a future where they all came together as a harmonious family. Then, Deborah intended to introduce John to her younger daughter, Tara, who was known for being more laid back and easygoing compared to Jason. Tara visited her mother, Deborah, and John on the day they moved into their new home. Upon meeting he for the first time, Tara felt uneasy due to his unfriendly behavior and lack of enthusiasm for the move. Despite Tara's initial doubts, she decided to give him a chance. However, her worries about John increased due to some suspicious signs. For example, John claimed to own homes in Newport Beach and Palm Springs, but he never discussed them going there to visit or moving there. He also didn't own a car. What's more, he spent most of his days at home, often playing video games. Just before Thanksgiving, Tara decided to secretly go through John's belongings and stumbled upon a nurse's certificate with his name on it. Realizing that John is not the doctor he said he was, Tara confronted him about this. This led to a huge outburst from John, who became angry and began yelling at Tara for trying to ruin her mother's happiness. He insists that Tara will fail to separate them. Deborah just stood there, listening, and eventually, a big argument broke out and ended with Tara leaving the house. John took advantage of the situation to manipulate Deborah into believing that her children were only interested in her wealth and were waiting for her to pass away, thus they not wanting her to be happy. On the eve of Thanksgiving, Deborah's extremely religious mother, Arlene, visited. However, John's attempt to present himself as a religious man in front of Arlene backfires and leads to more arguments. Following this incident, Deborah sought the advice of a psychotherapist. They have advised her to set boundaries with her children and strive for a peaceful life, advice that she chose to follow. Deborah and John moved to Balboa Island, where they enjoyed dining at local restaurants and taking leisurely strolls while admiring the beautiful scenery. Although Deborah was incredibly happy, but she was still worried about John's choice of outfit. His wardrobe consisted mainly of old medical scrubs, loose-fitting and frayed pants, and worn-out shirts. Deborah, on the other hand, wanted he to dress fashionably and complement her lifestyle. He attributed his lack of finer clothes to having them stolen during his time in Iraq. To address this issue, she took John shopping and bought him a complete set of high-end designer outfits. In early December, John went with Deborah on a work-related trip to Las Vegas, where they made the sudden decision to get married after knowing each other for less than 2 months. Deborah chose not to tell her children about this development. Around that time, a mysterious woman managed to get into John and Deborah's home. He used this incident to convince Deborah that they needed better security. He then set up several surveillance cameras around the house that he could control with his smartphone. He even put cameras in Deborah's office, where he could keep an eye on her activities. John's goal was to have complete control over Deborah. As time went on, Deborah started asking John about his family and life before they met. Every time she asked, he came up with a quick excuse or justification, even though his answers didn't quite add up. Deborah dismissed her doubts, thinking she had found the perfect partner. However, her children, especially Jason, were still wary of John. Since he didn't own a car, John used Deborah's, which led Tara and Jacelyn to investigate his activities. They installed a tracking device on John's car to monitor his movements. When this yielded no results, they decided to hire a private investigator to investigate further. The investigators' findings were shocking. John had filed for bankruptcy, held a nursing license but not a medical license, and had lived in multiple states, including Arizona, Ohio, Indiana, Tennessee, and California. Furthermore, he had been in the Orange County Jail. When Tara and Jason shared these things with their mother, Deborah, she remained unwavering, stating that her love for John would not change, even if the things were true. In late March, Deborah received a letter meant for John. The letter was from a former prison inmate, but before she could read it, he hastily took it from her. Initially, he was very angry, accusing her of not trusting him. He later claimed that the letter was from a friend he was providing emotional support to. Deborah was uneasy about John's explanation, and her concerns grew. The day after discovering lies, when John's left for work, and she decided to search through his belongings. This search revealed shocking truths about he. She found out that he was a former nurse anesthetist who had become addicted to pain medication, which led to his arrest and the downfall of his career. What's more disturbing is that Deborah discovers that he is a scammer and has been stealing from women he meets online. As Deborah searched further, she found court records showing that John had a search warrant issued for his storage unit. When authorities searched the unit, they found a handgun, bullets, a GPS tracker, syringes, and other suspicious items. This information was alarming. But what caught Deborah's attention was that he had multiple restraining orders against him from different women. The most unsettling fact, however, was that John had been released from prison on October 8th and had met Deborah just days later. Too overwhelmed by these facts, Deborah felt a mix of shock and fear. She realized that John was a violent felon who posed a big threat to her and her children. Despite the danger, Deborah decided to calm and waited for the right moment to take action. When John left for the hospital due to back problems, Deborah seized the opportunity. With her family's help, she quickly moved out of the house while he was away. During the process of packing John's belongings, Deborah discovered some disturbing documents, online comments from other women warning about John's manipulative nature. These comments described him as a skilled deceiver who used his charm and good looks to manipulate others. Convinced that John was unstable, Deborah decided to end their relationship and leave. However, John continued to message her, apologizing and asking her to visit him in the hospital. Feeling guilty, she eventually gave in to his requests. By June 2015, he had managed to persuade Deborah to reconcile with him. He offers a defense about the objects she found and confesses to hiding his past, believing she wouldn't care about it if he were honest. He admitted to lying about being a doctor to impress her and now begged for her help to turn his life around. Deborah decided to give her husband another chance and they moved to a new apartment in Irvine. However, her children were unhappy about the decision and did not want to see her. As a result, Deborah and John temporarily kept a distance from the children. In March 2016, Deborah had been trying to help John overcome his addiction for over a year, during which they had been married. Unfortunately, Deborah's entire family, particularly her daughter Jason, disliked John, and he doesn't like Jason either. The tension between them had grown so severe that John prohibited Deborah from seeing Jason. To make matters worse, John contacted Jason's real estate school, slandering her in front of the teachers. He also sent Jason threatening and vulgar messages, telling her that her mother didn't want anything to do with her. Although he appears to be recovering from rehab, the more cruel and aggressive he became. By April 2016, Deborah finally reached the limit of her tolerance. She wanted to end her relationship peacefully, so she started withdrawing money from her bank account to protect it. $30,000 was hidden in a lower drawer in her home. When John discovered the money, he claimed it belonged to him. And his behavior became increasingly aggressive as he had to accept the fact that their marriage would end in divorce. Realizing she needed to escape, Deborah took some personal items and moved to her friend Jacqueline's apartment in Irvine, which had a secure complex with multiple surveillance cameras. She attempted to obtain a restraining order but was denied by an Orange County judge. John lived in another state and was doing no harm, so all she could do was end the relationship and try to move on. After they separated, John moved to one of Deborah's house in Nevada. Despite her ignoring his calls, he persisted in contacting her. On June 11, 2016, John made another move, aimed at getting Deborah's attention. That day, Deborah drove her Jaguar to work and parked it in the office parking lot. During her work hours, the car was stolen. It was later found about a block and a half away, drenched in gasoline. The car had not been set on fire, it sustained minor damage. Security footage clearly identified John as the perpetrator of the theft. On the evening of August 20, 2016, Tara returned home from work and parked her car in the lot. As she stepped out of the vehicle, she was suddenly confronted by John, who approached her with a knife. He attempted to drag her back into the car, but Tara resisted and screamed for help. In the ensuing struggle, John tried to cover her mouth. But she managed to bite him. Tara, wearing heavy boots, used her leverage to kick John and knock the knife out of his hand. Seizing the opportunity, she picked up the knife and stabbed John multiple times, inflicting a total of 13 wounds. Her final strike was particularly severe, as it pierced his eye. A neighbor witnessed the struggle and rushed to Tara's aid, providing her with a towel to treat her injuries and calling the police. Despite his severe injuries, John was still alive when the paramedics arrived. A search of his car revealed evidence of his sinister intentions, including duct tape, cable ties, kitchen knives, and a passport, suggesting that he had planned to abduct Tara and escape the city with her as a hostage. John was hospitalized for 4 days to receive critical care, but unfortunately, his injuries were fatal, and he passed away at the age of 57. After his death, his body was cremated, and a memorial service was not held. Deborah and her children were severely affected by this. It took a while for Deborah to readjust to her normal life, but the memory still haunts her. She struggles with feelings of guilt for introducing a criminal into her family's life. As a result, Deborah has become extremely vigilant about her safety, carrying a stun gun and pepper spray with her at all times. She has vowed never to meet anyone online again. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Amy Widner. Amy Widner, born in 1973, is the second of 4 children. Her siblings include an older brother, John Paul, and 2 younger sisters, Tiny and Cassie, who are 1 and 4 years younger than Amy. After their parents divorced, Gloria, the children's mother, took on the responsibility of raising the children herself. As their father played no role in raising them, the family lived in a house in Indianapolis, with Amy helping her mother with various household chores, including cooking, cleaning, and caring for her younger sisters. Amy, a bright and cheerful 14-year-old girl, had big dreams of becoming a teacher. However, her life took an unexpected turn when she became pregnant. Afraid to tell her mother, she hid her pregnancy by wearing baggy clothes for over 5 months. As her belly grew, it became harder to hide it, and eventually, her family discovered her secret when she was nearly 6 months pregnant. Gathering all her courage, Amy told her mother, Gloria, and burst into tears. Amy begged her mother not to hate her, but Gloria, though shocked, offered words of comfort and encouragement. Gloria recalls feeling stunned, thinking that this was the worst thing that could happen in her life. However, she had no idea of the even more heartbreaking events that were about to happen. The father of Amy's child was 20-year-old Tony Abercrombie, a friend of her brother. What their family did not know was that Amy and Tony had a secret relationship, with only the two of them knowing about their intimacy. After learning of her daughter's pregnancy, Gloria took control and forbade Amy from seeing Tony. On October 25, 1987, Amy gave birth to a daughter named Emily. Amy started school again just 6 days after giving birth. Her mother, Gloria, strongly supported Amy's return to school by taking care of Emily, allowing Amy to focus on her studies. Gloria also made sure that Amy had time to socialize with friends and live a normal teenage life. As a new mother, Amy remained dedicated to her studies, impressing her teachers with her perseverance. Despite juggling the demands of motherhood, Amy excelled in her studies, continuing to receive praise from her teachers. Amy's family adapted to the new addition, with everyone sharing the care of Emily. Over time, life began to fall into a positive pattern, with Amy overcoming her difficulties. Just when things seemed to be going smoothly, a sudden change turned everything upside down. On November 13, 1989, 16-year-old Amy woke up with a severe sore throat and decided to stay home from school, despite her mother, Gloria, offering to take Emily to a nanny. She kept her 2-year-old daughter, Emily, with her. After breakfast together, Gloria went to work, and Amy's siblings went to school, leaving Amy and Emily alone at home. Gloria tried to contact Amy by phone at 9:30 a.m. but received no response. When she called again a few hours later and still had not heard anything, Gloria became worried. She asked a nearby neighbor to stop by and check on them. The neighbor found the house quiet and unresponsive, prompting Gloria to leave work immediately and go home. When she arrived, she found Emily sitting on the stairs. Gloria called Amy, but received no answer, so she went upstairs. The scene in Amy's bedroom was tragic and shocking. Amy lay motionless and naked on the bed, surrounded by bloodstains. When Gloria realized the urgency of the situation, she quickly called 911. The police arrived and carefully searched Amy's house. At first, they thought someone had tried to break in because several items were missing, including stereo equipment and a graphic equalizer that belonged to Amy's brother, John Paul. Another item missing was a piggy bank from Amy's room, a simple glass jar with about $50 in savings for school. The police did not find any signs of forced entry. It is likely that the perpetrator entered through an unlocked back door or the front door, which Amy may have opened herself. In Amy's room, the police found key evidence, a bloody handprint on the wall and several strands of hair, likely belonging to the attacker. The medical examiner determined that Amy had been hit in the head with a sharp object, sexually assaulted, and then strangled. Amy's 2-year-old daughter, Emily, may have witnessed these events. Fortunately, Emily was found unharmed. Due to Emily's young age, the police attempted to communicate with her and gather any information she had. To create a more comfortable environment, they used finger puppets to gently question Emily about the events. During the interaction, Emily mentioned that her mother seemed very angry that day. Unfortunately, Emily did not provide any further details. To aid in their investigation, the police collected evidence, including a section of the wall with the attacker's bloody handprint, as well as the victim's clothing and bedding at the crime scene. During the investigation of Amy's case, the police spoke to her family, friends, and neighbors to gather information. One of the people they interviewed was Amy's 17-year-old brother, John Paul. Police initially suspected him, but he had an alibi and no evidence linking him to the case. Another person of interest was Tony Abercrombie, Amy's ex-boyfriend and the father of her child. He denied any involvement in her murder and expressed his deep feelings for Amy. Tony had a credible alibi at the time of the murder. Police also investigated Troy Jackson, who lived next door to Amy. Although he claimed he had nothing to do with the murder, He knew that a stereo system had been stolen on the day of the murder. Troy had no bruises or scratches on his hands, and a hair sample did not match the hair found at the crime scene. Troy also passed a lie detector test, which eventually cleared him as a suspect. Police expanded their investigation by talking to other acquaintances, neighbors, and classmates of Amy. They collected fingerprints and hair samples from these people, but no evidence pointed to any of them. A large crowd attended Amy Widner's funeral, and police attended the funeral, observing the proceedings and looking for potential clues in the case. Months passed after Amy's death, and the police still had no leads on any suspects. Gloria Widner, Amy's mother, adopted her niece Emily. As the family grieved their loss, Gloria feared for their safety, as the killer had not been caught. Fearing for her children's safety, she considered moving to a new home, but financial constraints made this impossible, forcing them to face their fears in their current home. Amy's friends were now haunted by the fear that they might be the attacker's next target. To feel safer, many of them asked their parents to take precautions and improve the security of their homes. Some even went so far as to board up their windows to protect against potential attacks. One day, when Gloria returned home after a normal day, she expected to find her daughters home from school. However, she was met with an eerie silence when she entered the house. The house was eerily empty, but her daughters' shoes were in their usual place near the door. Horrifying thoughts filled Gloria's mind as she climbed the stairs, fearing another disaster. She stood frozen in her bedroom doorway. Gloria took a deep breath and pushed the door open, finding her children simply asleep, and she breathed a sigh of relief. Occasionally, the police would visit Amy's family, inadvertently forcing them to relive the pain of that terrible day. The constant reminders of the past eventually became unbearable for Gloria. All she wanted was for the police to leave her family alone and stop stirring up memories that would never bring Amy back. In 1989, Amy was murdered and the case went cold. 13 years later, a shocking development occurred when a 29-year-old man contacted the Indianapolis Police Department claiming that he had had a dream in which Amy provided information about her death. Although he provided details about the murder, most of the information was released in news reports. Police investigated the man, who was 16 at the time of the incident and lived across the street from Amy's house. His fingerprints and DNA were tested for any potential connection, but no match was found, leading to his release. Although his call did not contribute significant evidence, it prompted police to re-examine the unsolved case. In 2002, the investigation resumed, focusing on some of Amy's friends and acquaintances. Despite renewed efforts, the investigation once again hit a dead end, leaving the case unsolved. 8 years later, a Facebook group called Remembering Amy was created by her friends, sparking renewed interest in solving the case. A police officer, unfamiliar with Facebook, asked his colleague, Officer Bill Carter, to help him print out information from a Facebook group related to a cold case. Although Bill specializes in crimes other than homicide, reviewing the details of the case piqued his interest in Amy's murder. In his spare time, he began to explore the case files. Bill scrutinized the 2-decade-old case, re-examining every detail in the file, re-evaluating the evidence, and reviewing Amy's school records from the day of the murder. He also looked at the list of people who had attended Amy's funeral. By entering the case information into the database, Bill found some overlooked leads. Among them were several friends of Amy's brother who had never been questioned by the police and had not provided DNA samples. In 2011, Officer Bill expanded his investigation by contacting Amy's family and friends, asking for potential leads and the names of people who might have information about the case. As part of his new approach, he also began collecting DNA samples from people who had not previously been considered during the initial investigation. This effort complemented the neighborhood survey conducted after the crime, where police recorded the names of residents who lived near Amy's home. Bill reviewed the case file and returned to the area to determine if any of the original residents still lived nearby. His investigation led him to a woman who was a neighbor and friend of Amy's. The woman tried to recall the names of the boys Amy had befriended, and while she mentioned some names that the police knew, she also mentioned an unfamiliar name, Rodney Dank. In 2012, Bill received permission from the Cold Case Unit to officially take over the Amy case. His first step was to locate Rodney Dank to determine if he was a potential suspect. Amy's family was familiar with Rodney, as he was friends with Amy's brother, John Paul. They spent time together doing activities like biking and fishing. Bill asked John Paul about Rodney and learned that Rodney was a quiet, reserved person who kept to himself and did not arouse any suspicion. To gather more information, Bill went to the home of Rodney Dank, 40, who lived with his mother near Amy's family. Rodney worked at an auto parts store and had been divorced for some time, with an adult son whom he rarely saw. When Bill arrived at Rodney's home, his mother answered and told the police that Rodney was at work. Bill left his business card, asking Rodney to call him as soon as he returned. Rodney called Bill that evening and the police asked to meet with him to discuss Amy's murder. Rodney agreed and allowed Bill to come to his home. However, when Bill returned to Rodney's home, he was not there. Bill decided to run a background check on Rodney and discovered that Rodney had been convicted of assault in 1991 and burglary in 1997. The police also compared Rodney's fingerprints, which were already in the system, to the fingerprints found at Amy's house during the initial investigation. The test was conducted to determine if Rodney was involved in the case. When the results came back, they discovered that Rodney's fingerprints matched the bloody fingerprints found at the crime scene. After 23 years, Rodney was identified as the killer, but he had disappeared from the house. The police launched an extensive search. They tracked Rodney's credit card activity, which showed a rental car with an OnStar tracking system. The police located the car in Indianapolis, where Rodney was hiding at a friend's house. When surrounded by police, Rodney brandished a knife and claimed his innocence, injuring himself. He attempted to attack the police but was subdued with a taser, handcuffed, and taken to hospital. During a 2-day hospital interrogation that was captured on camera, Rodney confessed to Amy's murder. He said his original intention was to rob, not anticipating Amy's presence due to her illness. Rodney described entering the house through a sliding glass door, where he was suddenly confronted by a panicked Amy. In his panic, he grabbed the nearest object and hit Amy in the head, killing her. As he recounted the events of the next 2 days, Rodney repeatedly mentioned that his memory of the incident was hazy, blaming the 23 years that had passed since the crime. Rodney's account of his actions was inconsistent and he initially mentioned visiting Amy's house with someone called Bag. However, he could not recall many details about this person, including their appearance. When asked about Emily, Rodney stated that he did not see her during the incident and did not know that she was in the house or that she had called for help. Throughout the interrogation, Rodney remained calm. Rodney's DNA was collected and matched with semen found on Amy's bedsheets and blankets in 1989. Fingerprints and semen found at the crime scene were both confirmed to be Rodney's, with no indication that anyone else was involved. When Rodney was revealed as the killer, Amy's family was shocked. They were baffled how Rodney, who was quiet and unassuming, could have committed such a crime. Rodney was friends with Amy's brother John Paul and often visited their home, which was across the street from his. Even more remarkable was that Rodney attended Amy's funeral, where he mourned her death and offered his condolences to her mother, Gloria. Police Bill later found Rodney's signature in Amy's funeral book, a detail that had previously been overlooked. Reinvestigating the case led Bill to a crucial discovery. Rodney's name was first mentioned by Tony, Amy's ex-boyfriend and Emily's biological father, in 2003. Tony revealed that Rodney had frequently visited Amy's family home. Bill realized that Rodney had somehow escaped notice in 1989 and had never been suspected or questioned at the time. Further investigation into Rodney's background in 2012 uncovered a disturbing fact. His biological son, Dylan, was in prison for a crime committed in 2009. Dylan was 16 when he killed his biological mother, Mary McHenry. He claimed that he had acted in response to her abuse, using a baseball bat to inflict the fatal wounds. Mary died of her injuries. Dylan turned 17 just days after the incident, leaving behind a tragic and heartbreaking case. Despite being largely absent from Dylan's life due to his early divorce from Mary McHenry, Rodney attended Dylan's trial in 2009, opting for a plea deal that resulted in a 20-year prison sentence. By the time of his scheduled release in 2029, Dylan will be 37. Rodney, on the other hand, initially insisted that he had an accomplice in Amy's murder, a man he knew as Bag. However, in June 2013, just 10 days before his trial was due to begin, Rodney, then 42, recanted his earlier confession, admitting that he had acted alone in Amy's murder. Rodney's sudden confession, combined with the substantial evidence against him, led to his 65-year prison sentence in 2013. Amy's family held a meeting with Detective Bill Carter after Amy's case was solved. To mark the 24th anniversary of her death, they released 24 balloons into the air, expressing their gratitude for Detective Bill's crucial role in solving the case. The family thanked him for his efforts, especially for identifying Rodney as the killer after just 12 days of investigation. Police officer Bill Carter received a prestigious award from the Indianapolis Police Department in January 2014. Although he was offered a position in the Homicide Bureau, he chose to stay in his current position. Years later, Amy's daughter, Emily, has grown up. She graduated from her mother's alma mater and then went to college, looking for new opportunities. Eventually, Emily moved from Indianapolis to California. Gloria still lives in the house where her daughter, Amy, tragically died. She has kept Amy's room as a memory of her, with photos still on display. Now, the room is also where Gloria's grandchildren play when they visit for the holidays, bringing joy and new life to a space once filled with sadness and loss. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Samadei Fernandez. Samadei Fernandez was born in Costa Rica in February 1975. Not much is known about her early family life. Samadei grew up in Cuba, where she lived with her mother, Sonia Fonseca. She attended a local school. Samadei often used force or deception to get what she wanted. Samadei's striking looks and perfect figure make her a magnet, especially to men. Samadei's beauty and charm are overshadowed by her greed, vanity, and self-interest, which ultimately drives men away. Furthermore, she is extremely jealous and aggressive. Samadei, due to her youthful resemblance to Barbie, spent several years working at a Universal Company bookstore, dressing up as the iconic doll. After graduating from high school, Samadei started a long-term relationship with Osvaldo Fernando Ballery, a local television journalist 16 years her senior. Their relationship resulted in the birth of children, Christopher in 1996 and Christina a year later. However, constant arguments and jealousy eventually led Samadei to end the relationship in 2012. Shortly after, Osvaldo, 53, died suddenly. Osvaldo did not include Samadei in his will. Samadei took drastic action and seized Osvaldo's house, changing the locks to prevent relatives and heirs from entering. Samadei also took away Osvaldo's valuables. Osvaldo's family was furious and took Samadei to court for theft. Police intervened and forced Samadei to leave the house, but no criminal charges were filed against her. Samadei had other relationships, most notably with Miguel Angel Perez, the father of Samadei's third daughter, Maria. Although some reports claimed the couple were officially married, the relationship ended in divorce after a few years. It was strange that some of Samadei's lovers disappeared or died mysteriously under mysterious circumstances. But for a long time, for some reason, no one paid any attention to it. Another former lover, Diaco, met a tragic end after breaking up with Samadei. He was murdered during a robbery. The killers were never caught or brought to justice. As with the previous case, there was much speculation surrounding Samadei's possible involvement, but there was no solid evidence linking her to the crime. Samadei's most famous victim was Gerardo Cruz. Gerardo Cruz, a native of Costa Rica, was born in December 1992 in the city of San Jose. Gerardo Cruz lived with his mother, Ana Patricia, who soon married a man named Hermes Rodriguez, who raised Gerardo Cruz as his own son. Gerardo Cruz he attended a regular school, developed a passion for motorcycles, and met his future partner, Carol, at a young age. By the time he was 23, Gerardo had settled down with Carol and their 4-year-old daughter, Genesis, in the suburban home of his aunt and uncle in San Sebastian. To support his family, Gerardo Cruz took a job at a local bakery. It was around this time, in the summer of 2015, that Gerardo Cruz met Samadei, a 40-year-old woman who frequented the bakery. Despite her age, Samadei was attractive. Samadei began having affairs with men much younger than herself, because the attention of young lovers probably delighted Samadei. Gerardo Cruz was one such affair. Despite the significant age difference, Gerardo Cruz quickly fell in love with Samadei and began to meet secretly. Samadei came to the bakery every day to see Gerardo Cruz, and other employees took notice of Samadei's frequent visits. Samadei would bring his 19-year-old daughter, Cristina, with him to the bakery. Initially, Gerardo Cruz was able to balance his family life and secretly date Samadei without either woman finding out. He eventually let his guard down. He began bragging about his success with women and began sharing stories with friends and colleagues about Samadei, describing her as a great mistress who showered him with gifts. After just a few months together, in October 2015, Samadei discovered the truth about Gerardo Cruz having a pregnant wife and a child. Samadei was so angry that she started calling and texting Carol, Gerardo Cruz's wife, insulting her and threatening to kill Gerardo Cruz if he didn't belong to her. Gerardo Cruz tried to beg Carol's forgiveness. As for Samadei, he did not take her threat seriously, believing that she would quickly calm down and find a new boyfriend. Just days after breaking up with Samadei, Gerardo Cruz saw a man secretly filming a young girl's underwear with his phone. Gerardo Cruz filmed the man, stopped the girl, and advised her to report the incident to the police. He then chased the man, trying to capture his face on camera, until the man escaped in a taxi. Gerardo Cruz posted the video online and it quickly went viral. The man was identified as Luis Solano Delgado, a former member of the Ministry of Finance. The media picked up the story, and Gerardo Cruz became a national celebrity, outing Luis Solano Delgado in interviews. However, Luis Solano Delgado's lawyer accused Gerardo Cruz of wrongdoing, claiming that the video's distribution was illegal and preparing to file a lawsuit. Gerardo Cruz was surprised, wondering why he was being prosecuted instead of the man who committed the crime. Gerardo Cruz gave a radio interview confidently, without fear. The next day, he canceled his meeting with Oswald, citing an emergency after receiving a text message from Samadei, supposedly to discuss another interview with a young woman in a park. Unsuspecting, Gerardo Cruz met with her, but instead of journalists, 2 men stole his bag, beat him, and stabbed him multiple times. Gerardo Cruz called Oswald when he was unconscious, and Oswald called the police and paramedics. Gerardo Cruz was taken to the hospital, where doctors fought to save his life for 42 days. Gerardo Cruz underwent numerous operations, but unfortunately, they were unsuccessful in saving his life. He passed away in the intensive care unit on November 19. Gerardo Cruz's funeral was attended by a large number of people who wanted to express their condolences to his family. The community came together to express their hope that the police would quickly apprehend the perpetrators and bring them to justice. Initially, the investigation explored multiple theories. The first was that Cruz was a victim of a robbery gone wrong. This seemed plausible, given that he was attacked in a park, his bag was stolen, and he was stabbed with a knife. The first theory is that Gerardo Cruz was the victim of a botched robbery, as he was attacked in a park, his bag stolen, and stabbed. However, Gerardo Cruz recently released a video exposing a nationally known former official, which has fueled another theory, that the attack was a revenge killing. The media speculated that the former official, Sol Mano Delgado, may have hired a hitman to silence Gerardo Cruz, who had tarnished his reputation. The murder has sparked widespread debate in the press. Police later identified and tracked down the two men. The footage was made public and shown repeatedly on news programs, with viewers encouraged to watch the footage closely. Soon after, the identity of one suspect was confirmed when he voluntarily surrendered to the police, cooperating with the investigation in hopes of receiving a reduced sentence. The investigation quickly identified several accomplices and organizers of the crime, Samadei and her daughter Christina, thanks to information provided. Those involved, including taxi driver Ronald Archie, worker Cesar Chavez, a young miner, and Omar Costa, were arrested. The investigation revealed the roles and connections of all those involved in the crime through phone calls and text messages. Samadei was identified as the mastermind, who had carefully planned the murder for his daughter Christina. They enlisted the help of friends Ronald Archie and Cesar Chavez to find two assassins to kill Gerardo Cruz and stage a robbery in the park at night. Omar Costa later joined the plot, tasked with ensuring Gerardo Cruz was present at the park. Samadei chose October 7th as the date of the massacre. Samadei kept in constant contact with all the suspects, assigning roles and ensuring everyone followed the plan. Furthermore, Samadei asked the participants to take an item from Gerardo Cruz as proof that the crime had been completed. The evidence against Samadei was a series of text messages outlining the murder plan and the roles of each participant in detail. The motive behind the crime was a case of jealousy. She had carefully planned the crime and even involved her own daughter, who assisted her in every step of the process. Both Samadei and her daughter were taken into custody immediately, and the possibility of releasing them on bail was ruled out due to concerns that they would attempt to flee the country. Their accomplices were also detained, except for Omar Costa, who was responsible for surveillance and was the youngest participant in the crime. As a minor, Omar Costa was handed over to authorities that specialize in handling juvenile offenders. The investigation took about a year and a half to complete, and the trial did not begin until December 2017. It was discovered that Samadei had a history of criminal activity. The verdict was not announced until January 23, 2018. According to the court decision, Samadei was sentenced to 30 years in prison. Her daughter, as well as Ronald Archie and Cesar Chavez, received 25 years in prison each. Omar Costa, on the other hand, who had been following the victim, was acquitted. Gerardo Cruz's family has received $140,000 in moral damages. After the verdict was announced, relatives expressed gratitude to the court for giving Gerardo Cruz's killers a fair punishment. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Donald Harvey. Donald Harvey was born on April 15, 1952, in Hamilton, Ohio, to Ray and Goldie Donald. He was the oldest of 3 children and was affectionately known as Donnie by his parents. Following his birth, the family relocated to Boonville, Kentucky, a small community in the Appalachian Mountains. Despite struggling with poverty, they was loving and nurturing to their children. However, their marriage began to deteriorate due to their economic struggles. As a child, Donald was quiet and mostly kept to himself, showing no apparent signs of abnormality. However, he suffered a traumatic past, being sexually abused and assaulted by at least 3 men. The perpetrators included his uncle on his mother's side, who molested him during visits to his grandmother's home, and an older neighbor who offered him money for sexual favors. Additionally, at the age of 18, Donald claimed to have been sexually assaulted by his roommate, Randy White. While a traumatic past can contribute to the development of psychological issues, Donald was often perceived as a loner in school. He preferred to focus on his studies and rarely participated in extracurricular activities, opting to read instead. Although this helped him earn good grades, it also led to teasing and the label of teacher's pet. After graduating from Sturgeon Elementary School, Donald enrolled in Boonville High School in 1968. Despite his good academic record, he soon found himself bored with the daily routine and decided to drop out. However, he eventually earned his diploma through a correspondence school in Chicago and received his general education development at the age of 16. With no clear future plans, Donald struggled to figure out his life's direction. He eventually moved to Cincinnati, Ohio, where he landed a job at a local factory. However, when the factory closed down in 1970, Donald lost his job and was left uncertain about his future. Around that time, his mother called and asked him to visit his ailing grandfather, who was in Marymount Hospital in London, Kentucky. Donald agreed to the visit. During his daily visits to see his ailing grandfather, Donald formed strong relationships with the hospital workers, who grew to genuinely like him. Their admiration for him led to an unexpected job offer. Although it is unclear what motivated Donald to want to work as a nurse's aide, some speculate that he needed to earn a living after losing his previous job. Despite lacking formal training in nursing or medicine, the hospital staff entrusted him with responsibilities. Donald's job at the hospital involved caring for patients on his own, including tasks like changing bedpans, inserting catheters, and giving medications. Despite the challenges, Donald's early weeks at the hospital passed without incident. However, on the evening of May 31, 1970, Donald was attending to 88-year-old stroke patient Logan Evans in a private room. Suddenly, Evans rubbed his own feces on Donald's face. While it's likely Evans wasn't fully aware of his actions due to the effects of his stroke, the incident triggered something within Donald, leading him to completely lose control. Without realizing what he was doing, Donald suffocated Evans with a blue plastic bag and a pillow until the patient was motionless. He then checked Evans' pulse with a stethoscope to confirm his death. Following the killing, Donald disposed of the plastic bag, cleaned Evans' body, dressed him in a fresh gown, and showered him before notifying the nurses about the patient's passing. After the first incident, no one suspected anything out of the ordinary. Donald went to cover the patient with a sheet, but instead, he used his hand to smother him to death. It was surprising that he was able to do this without anyone noticing, especially since he used a pillow to kill him. The next day, Donald was assigned to care for another elderly patient, 69-year-old James Tyree. He made a critical mistake by using the wrong size catheter on him. When James realized what was happening, he yelled at Donald to remove it. Donald used his hand to restrain him, which caused him to vomit blood and eventually die from an air embolism. Once again, no one suspected foul play. With no one suspecting him of any wrongdoing after his first 2 murders, he became more confident and careless. Just 3 weeks after the first murder, Donald deliberately cut off the oxygen tank of 42-year-old patient Elizabeth Wyatt. He later claimed that he had ended her suffering, as she had expressed a desire to die. A nurse found Elizabeth dead 4 hours later, but no one questioned Donald about her death. Over the next 10 months, he took advantage of the lack of suspicion and killed 15 more patients under his care. He saw this as an opportunity to indulge his darker impulses, and he continued to kill without being detected. Donald's methods of murder varied widely, driven by a desire for pleasure or experimentation. He would often use smothering, sabotage oxygen tanks, inject lethal drugs, or overdose patients with medication. When angered, his methods became even more brutal. On one occasion, he inserted a coat hanger through a patient's catheter after an argument, puncturing the patient's bladder and bowel, which led to infection and death a few days later. Despite the brutality of his actions, Donald considered himself a mercy killer, the self-proclaimed angel of death who was playing God with vulnerable patients. He cloaked his horrific deeds in a mask of kindness, believing that his actions were somehow merciful. On March 31, 1971, the day he was arrested for burglary while drunk, Donald's life took a turn. In his incoherent confession, he revealed his dark secret to the police, but no one took him seriously. As a result, he faced only charges of petty theft and paid a fine instead of serving prison time. This close call prompted Donald to attempt to turn his life around. For a few months, he tried to regain stability and eventually landed a part-time job as a nurse's aide at Cardinal Hill Hospital in Lexington. In June 1973, Donald started a second nursing job at Good Samaritan Hospital in Lexington. He held both nursing positions simultaneously before eventually moving on. Between August 1974 and September 1975, he took on two non-nursing roles, a telephone operator in Lexington and a clerk at St. Luke's Hospital in Fort Thomas, Kentucky. Notably, Donald was able to resist his urge to kill during this period. A possible explanation is that he had limited access to patients in these new roles, which may have also contributed to his decision to change jobs frequently. Donald's struggle to control his killing urges eventually became too much to manage, leading him to relocate to Cincinnati, Ohio in September 1975. He found employment at the Cincinnati VA Medical Hospital, working various roles including nursing assistant, housekeeping aide, and autopsy assistant. The hospital's night shift schedule and lack of supervision gave him unrestricted access to all areas of the hospital. Over the next decade, Donald murdered at least 15 patients while working at the hospital. He meticulously documented each crime in a diary, detailing the methods he used to kill his victims. These methods included poisoning patients' food and drinks, suffocating them with plastic bags and towels, and injecting them with lethal substances. Donald's experimentation with different methods was influenced by his study of medical journals, which he used to refine his techniques and avoid detection. Donald preferred cyanide as his method of murder, which he mixed into patients' food or administered through their gastric tubes. He accumulated a large stash of cyanide, approximately 30 pounds, which he stole from the hospital over time and kept at home for safekeeping. He stated that he began using morphine to kill patients in the 1970s, particularly in small hospitals in Kentucky where it was not heavily regulated. He also mentioned he used other methods, such as cyanide, arsenic, adhesive cleaner, and suffocation with a plastic bag. Despite the numerous deaths, he claimed to have avoided suspicion by making them appear accidental or due to natural causes. He revealed that in reality, he was a serial killer hiding in plain sight, preying on vulnerable patients. He took it upon himself to decide who lived or died, often without the patients' or their families' consent. He justified his actions as merciful, but he acknowledged that the truth was more complex. While he claimed that his crimes were motivated by compassion, other evidence suggested otherwise. He recounted that a turning point came in the early 1980s when his behavior became more erratic and driven by rage. He started dating a man named Doug Hill, but their relationship was tumultuous. After a heated argument, he poisoned Doug's ice cream with arsenic, and fortunately, Doug survived. This incident marked the first time he tried to harm someone outside of the hospital, revealing a darker side to his nature. Donald's behavior took a dark turn after a fight with Carl Heller. He moved in with Carl Heller, but the relationship quickly became toxic. Donald's jealousy and paranoia led him to suspect Heller of cheating, and he started lacing Carl's food with arsenic to keep her from leaving. As time passed, Donald's cruel actions extended beyond his home. He poisoned a female neighbor's drink with hepatitis serum during an argument, and she almost died before receiving treatment. Unfortunately, another neighbor, Helen Metzger, was not as fortunate. Donald poisoned one of her pies with arsenic, which ultimately led to her death. Donald's lack of consequences for his crimes emboldened him, and he became more confident and reckless. He felt like he was above the law, having gotten away with multiple murders. In April 1983, Donald's behavior escalated. After a disagreement with Heller's parents, he began secretly poisoning their food with small doses of arsenic. The following month, Carl's father, Henry, suffered a stroke and was hospitalized. During a visit, Donald saw an opportunity to strike again and laced Henry's pudding with arsenic. Henry died that night. Over the next year, Donald continued to target Carl's mother, Margaret, periodically poisoning her in an attempt to kill her. In January 1984, Donald's relationship with his partner, Carl, ended, and he was asked to leave their home. Donald reacted poorly to the breakup and spent the next 2 years trying to harm Carl using poison. He also attempted to kill one of Carl's female friends in a separate incident, but was unsuccessful. Although Donald did manage to hospitalize Carl at one point, his attempts to kill her ultimately failed. Donald's behavior raised suspicions on July 18, 1985, when security guards at his workplace discovered a suspicious collection of items in his gym bag. The contents included a gun, hypodermic needles, surgical scissors, gloves, a cocaine spoon, medical texts, occult books, and a biography of serial killer Charles Sawbridge. As a result of the discovery, Donald was fined $50 for carrying a firearm on federal property and given the option to resign from his job quietly. Surprisingly, the incident was not documented in his work record, and the hospital did not investigate Donald for potential involvement in other crimes during his employment. He was able to secure a new job as a part-time nurse's aide at Drake Memorial Hospital in Cincinnati just 7 months later, in February 1986. Donald Harvey's new employers were impressed by his work and soon offered him a full-time position at the hospital. Unbeknownst to them, Donald had a dark past, and he quickly fell back into his old routine. Over the next 13 months, he murdered 26 more patients and attempted to kill several others by tampering with their life support machines, injecting them with lethal substances, and suffocating them. The murder spree finally came to an end on March 7, 1987, with the death of 44-year-old John Powell. Powell had been recovering from a motorcycle accident, but his sudden and mysterious death raised suspicions. Due to Ohio's law requiring an autopsy in cases of vehicular homicide, the authorities were able to investigate Powell's death. During the autopsy, the assistant coroner detected a faint scent of almonds, a sign of cyanide poisoning. This discovery led the authorities to launch an investigation into Powell's death. Initially, they suspected Powell's friends and family, but they found no evidence or motive. The focus then shifted to hospital employees who had access to Powell's room, and Donald Harvey was one of the individuals they needed to rule out. Hospital employees were voluntarily taking polygraph tests to clear their names. Donald Harvey also was offered to take a test, but he didn't follow through. Instead, he called in sick on the day of his scheduled test. He had even purchased a book on how to cheat on lie detector tests. This raised suspicions, especially when investigators discovered his notorious nickname, Angel of Death, and learned about his questionable partner from the hospital. As the investigation continued, authorities focused on Donald due to the unusual number of deaths surrounding him. During questioning, Donald initially denied any involvement in John Powell's murder, claiming he was just a victim of circumstance. However, after hours of interrogation, he eventually confessed to putting cyanide in Powell's feeding tube. He claimed he did it out of sympathy for Powell and his family, but denied responsibility for the other suspicious deaths. Donald was taken into custody, and investigators began searching for more evidence. On August 11, 1987, Donald, then 35, confessed to committing 33 murders over the past 17 years. As the investigation continued, the number of murders he confessed to grew to 70. Donald's claims of multiple murders raised suspicions among investigators, who questioned the accuracy of the numbers he provided. To verify his credibility, they ordered a series of psychiatric evaluations by multiple experts. The tests concluded that Donald was sane and competent, able to distinguish right from wrong and conform to the law. In 1987, Donald was sentenced to 8 life terms plus 20 years for the murders committed at Mary's Mount Hospital. The following year, he pleaded guilty to 3 additional murders and 3 attempted murders in Cincinnati, receiving 3 life sentences and 3 terms of 7 to 25 years. After a 2-year investigation, the remaining cases were closed due to insufficient evidence linking Donald to the crimes. The public was both shocked by Donald's actions, and many wondered what drove him to commit such heinous crimes. In a 1991 interview with the Columbus Dispatch, Donald revealed that his motivation stemmed from a desire for control. He felt that others had controlled him for 18 years, and he sought to reclaim power over his own life. Donald admitted that he enjoyed the sense of power that came with deciding who lived or died. Donald Harvey is one of the most notorious serial killers in U.S. history, not only due to the high number of victims but also because he targeted people he knew personally, including his patients. An Associated Press article from 2001 listed him as the worst serial killer in the United States. Contrary to expectations that Donald would spend the rest of his life in prison and die of natural causes, his life took a different turn. On March 28, 2017, Donald was found severely beaten in his cell at the Toledo Correctional Institution, where he was being held in protective custody. He died 2 days later from severe head injuries. Months later, an inmate named James Elliott confessed to the crime in a letter to the Toledo Blade. James, who was serving a 37-year sentence for multiple burglaries, claimed that he had committed the murder to bring closure to the families of Donald's victims, who were from his hometown in Kentucky. In his letter, James wrote that he hoped his actions would bring some solace to the victims' families, as Donald had not received the punishment he deserved from the courts. In September 2019, James was sentenced to life in prison after pleading guilty to the murder of the notorious Angel of Death. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Jolene Cummings. Jolene Cummings, a 34-year-old mother of 3, lived in Fernandina Beach and was going through a divorce from her husband, Jason. As part of their arrangement, Jason would pick up the children on weekends from their home in Fernandina Beach, where Jolene lived with them. Jolene worked as a hairdresser at Tangle's Hair Salon. On Saturday, May 12, 2018, she worked until 5 p.m. The next day was Mother's Day and also her 34th birthday. According to their plan, Jolene was supposed to meet Jason in the parking lot of the Winn-Dixie supermarket in Hilliard on Sunday to pick up the children. However, Jolene failed to show up, and Jason was unable to reach her by phone. Jolene's mother, Ann Johnson, also tried to contact her to wish her a happy birthday, but all her calls went straight to voicemail. Jason eventually called and to ask if she knew why Jolene hadn't arrived to pick up the children. Jolene failed to pick up her children, which was unusual behavior for her. Concerned, Ann reported Jolene missing to the police on Monday, May 14th, after being unable to contact Jolene. The police immediately launched an investigation and issued a missing person poster with Jolene's photo. They also put out an alert for her 2006 Ford Expedition. On the same day, police and volunteers searched the forest area near Jolene's home but found nothing. The police learned that Jolene was last seen leaving work at the Tangles Salon on Saturday, May 12. The salon's owner reported that Jolene and her coworker, Jennifer, had closed the salon together at 5 p.m. that day. According to Jennifer, they had each gotten into their own cars and driven away separately after work. The police discovered that Jolene's last phone activity was an outgoing call made while she was still at work on May 12. The police were determined to find a lead and began scrutinizing Jolene's personal life. They focused on her ex-boyfriend Jason, as spouses often turn against each other during divorce and custody battles. Meanwhile, detectives uncovered that 5 days before Jolene vanished, a neighbor reported a loud argument at Jolene's residence. The dispute was between Jolene and Jason, with their children present. Jason had asked Jolene to let him stay with her temporarily, but she refused, knowing the police were searching for him for violating his parole. In a fit of rage, Jason began destroying property. By the time the police arrived, Jason had seemingly escaped, but the truth was unclear. After Jolene disappeared, the police began to focus on Jason as a person of interest in her disappearance. On the second day of the investigation, May 15, 2018, several significant events unfolded. The police discovered Jason hiding in Jolene's house, where he had been since the day Jolene's neighbor reported a loud argument to the authorities. He was subsequently arrested and taken to the police station for questioning. During the interrogation, Jason claimed to have no involvement in Jolene's disappearance. Meanwhile, the police found a crucial lead. Jolene's SUV was discovered parked outside a Home Depot hardware store, just a few miles from her workplace. The vehicle showed no signs of damage or struggle. After a 2-day break, Jolene's salon reopened on May 15. At 10 a.m., the police visited the salon to speak with Jennifer Sibbert, the last person to see Jolene before the weekend. However, Jennifer didn't show up for work, claiming she had an urgent matter to attend to in another city. Thanks to CCTV footage, investigators made a breakthrough in Jolene's disappearance. The footage revealed Jolene's car entering the parking lot of a hardware store, where it was later found by the police. Notably, Jennifer had claimed that she and Jolene closed the salon together at 5 p.m. on May 12, but the CCTV footage showed Jolene's car arriving at the hardware store at 1:17 a.m. on May 13, a gap of 8 hours and 17 minutes. At a press conference, Sheriff Bill Leepert explained that the CCTV footage showed Jolene's car parking at 1:17 a.m. on Sunday. The video showed the driver waiting for a few minutes before getting out. But instead of seeing Jolene exit the car, the footage surprisingly showed Jennifer Sibbert, the same hairdresser who claimed to be the last person to see Jolene. After leaving Jolene's car, Jennifer went to the gas station across the street. The gas station footage shows Jennifer entering the store, where she purchased a bottle of water and requested that an employee call her a taxi. The taxi was later confirmed to have taken her to her workplace, a salon. According to the gas station employee, Jennifer appeared to be annoyed and had visible, fresh abrasions on her face. As a result, Jennifer Sibbert became the primary suspect in the investigation, and the police began searching for her. However, the address she had provided on her job application was found to be fake. Despite her attempts to hide, Jennifer was eventually found. On May 16, police officers spotted her black Kia Soul parked between two trucks in a recreation area, just 50 meters from the salon. Upon approaching the vehicle, the officers discovered Jennifer sleeping inside. Jennifer Sibbert was arrested and initially charged with stealing a car belonging to Jolene Cummings. When police brought her in for questioning, they noticed abrasions on her hands and face and asked her to explain them. She claimed she had been bitten by bed bugs. Further investigation revealed that she was homeless, often sleeping in her car and using a local fitness center shower. As investigators dug deeper, they made a surprising discovery that Jennifer Sibbert was not her real name. In fact, she was actually Kimberly Kessler, born in 1968 and reported missing in Pennsylvania in 2012. It turned out that she had been using the identity of Jennifer Marie Siebert, a 13-year-old girl who had died in a car accident in Germany in 1987 and was buried in Pennsylvania. The investigation into Kimberly Kessler's case revealed a trail of deception dating back to 1996, when she began using stolen identities. At that time, she was living in Pennsylvania. Since then, Kessler has assumed at least 18 different identities and lived in 33 cities across 14 states. Many of these aliases bear similar names, which she often obtained by stealing names from gravestones and cemeteries. The police charged Kimberly Kessler with forgery after discovering she had been using fake names. A search of a storage unit she rented uncovered several suspicious items, including 4 wigs, a bag containing 2 cut-off hair tails, and 3 mobile phones. However, the most significant evidence was the discovery of Jolene Cummings's DNA on Kessler's sock and shoe. Additionally, scissors found in Kessler's car also contained Jolene's DNA. A review of Kessler's phone search history revealed that Kessler was preparing for Jolene's disappearance, which was not an accident. 2 weeks before Jolene vanished on May 12, Kessler searched for information on murder cases, including a query about a man who was charged with murder after his co-worker's remains were found in his yard. She also searched for information on co-workers who had been found guilty of murder, even when the victim's body had not been found. Kessler's search history also included queries about how to use a tourniquet, as well as information on female murderers in Florida and autopsy procedures. Furthermore, she searched for information on post-mortem changes, which suggests that she was trying to learn about what happens to the body after death. These search queries are particularly suspicious in light of a discovery made by the owner of the hair salon where Jolene worked. The owner reported that the plant in the salon had been replaced, which may be connected to Kessler's search for information on how to dispose of a body. On May 13, the day Jolene failed to pick up her kids, Kessler conducted internet searches at 12:05 p.m. for indoor palm and then at 12:06 p.m. for variation palm tree. The police analyzed CCTV footage from a nearby home goods store and found that Kessler visited the store on May 14 at 2:39 p.m. and left 30 minutes later with a palm plant, which was later found at the Tangles Hair Salon. Kessler's online searches continued, with Jolene Cummings I Have Vanished on May 15 at 6:13 p.m. and No Body No Crime on May 16 at 6:27 p.m. Forensic experts used luminol and ultraviolet light to examine the hair salon and discovered evidence of a serious crime, as the room glowed under the testing. On May 22, the sheriff announced during a press conference that they had gathered sufficient evidence to conclude that Jolene Cummings was dead, although some evidence was being withheld to protect the investigation. Further investigation revealed that Jolene had expressed concerns about her co-worker Jennifer, the new hairdresser, to another employee at the Tangles salon, stating that Jennifer seemed suspicious and was hiding something. This conversation took place about a week before Jolene's disappearance. Witnesses reported that Jolene and Jennifer had a tense relationship, and one person even saw them arguing on May 9, just 3 days before Jolene vanished. The Tangles Hair Salon eventually closed on June 5, 2018. The hair salon footage shows of Kessler visiting the dumpster at least 4 times. In the first footage, taken shortly after midnight, Kessler is seen doing something near the dumpster. At 8:08 a.m., she returns to throw away a heavy-looking white garbage bag. 14 minutes later, she disposes of another similar bag. The final footage, taken an hour before midnight, shows Kessler lifting a waste container to empty its contents, suggesting it also holds something heavy. The Walmart security footage revealed what Kessler had thrown away in the dumpster. The video showed her purchasing items at the self-checkout, including garbage bags, cleaning supplies, latex gloves, and an electric knife. This discovery led the police to investigate further. They found that a local waste management company was taking trash to a landfill in Georgia. In July 2018, nearly 200 people searched the landfill for a week, but the sheriff did not disclose what they found, citing the ongoing investigation. Near the dumpster where Kessler disposed of the white garbage bags, the police discovered a piece of jewelry, women's shoes, and a blue plastic container that matched one found in Kessler's storage unit. The container contained Jolene Cummings' DNA. Although Jolene's body was not found, the police had sufficient evidence to arrest Kessler for her murder. Kessler's first court appearance was on January 17, 2019, where she pleaded not guilty. However, the trial was delayed for several years due to concerns about Kessler's sanity. She went on a hunger strike, losing significant weight, and her court appearances often ended in outbursts of anger. In 2021, Kessler underwent mandatory treatment before the court session, and she was eventually deemed competent to stand trial. During a press conference, Sheriff Labar made a statement, saying that they were sending Kessler to Florida State Prison, where she would spend the rest of her life. Sadly, Jolene Cummings' body has never been recovered or found.